The Earth is 70% water. And 30% land. But the entire sky belongs to us.
The expressed purpose of my channel is to investigate and unveil UFO legacy program operations. Special access, unacknowledged special access, and controlled access programs. Recessed to the darkest corners of the US industrial base and black budget. Carved out of traditional oversight channels that performs full spectrum recovery, storage, exploitation, derivation, and program protection of UFOs and technologies of unknown origin. Since the 2023 testimony of David Grush, what once appeared to me as a tangled web of nebulous programs and names existing under the ever-infamous claims and testimony of quote-unquote UFO crash retrievals and quote-unquote UFO reverse engineering have begun to form a crystal clear and quite tangible picture. After all, if these programs do indeed exist as a shadow within the Department of Defense and Intelligence community, which I vehemently believe they do, a footprint of involved agencies, directorates, offices, infrastructure, program protection institutions, etc. that actually possess the budget, resources, and statutory and regulatory authority to engage in various aspects of UFO legacy programs should be traceable with enough analysis. And while the structure of such UFO legacy programs is likely more complicated and complex than a channel like mine will ever fully decipher, my first and only goal is to uncover these programs that are tasked with collection to derivation of non-human technologies that have existed since at least 1947. My pursuit of exposing UFO legacy program operations has led me to discuss myriad involved Department of Defense and intelligence community agencies, as well as offices, directorates, defense industrial base infrastructure, federally funded research and development centers, program protection strategies, defense contractors, major range and test facility bases, U.S. executive branch compartments, creative classification systems under the Department of Energy, direct action crash retrieval Tier 1 units, security mechanisms, senior flag officers, general officers, and senior executive service, etc., 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 that comprise countless siloed UFO legacy programs. Recently, I discussed a conceptual outward view of UFO programs and visualized this organizational chart as a pyramid that I strongly believe takes all of the aspects I just spoke of above and offers an accurate assessment of the structure of such technology of unknown origin or TUO programs. And let us quickly recap my theorized pyramid. At the top of this pyramid sits the UFO control group, the lucky few who possess what we might call a consensus understanding of UFOs and UFO legacy programs. Individuals who can access programs siloed from one another within the US Department of Defense and intelligence communities. I wager such individuals may include secretive scientific think tanks run out of the MITRE Corporation, like the Jason Advisory Panel, and even powerful figures above them that share ties to the U.S. executive branch, like the late former Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney. Beneath the Dick Cheneys, Jasons, and quote-unquote UFO control group, I believe sits UFO legacy program administrators, offices and agencies tasked with specific TUO operations hidden within SAPs, USAPs, and CAPs. Such admins likely include directorates and elements of the Big Six intelligence agencies. The NRO, specifically NRO Acquisitions, NGA, NURO, the DIA, CIA, and their infamous Directorate of Science and Technology, and the NSA. Headquarters, directorates, major commands aka MAJCOMS, and elements within the US Navy, Air Force, and Army, as well as compartments of the US National Security Council within the executive branch, such as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment under the Secretary of Defense, and Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Acquisition, Technology, and Facilities under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Indeed, I strongly theorize that even at an admin level, UFO legacy programs are highly compartmentalized and siloed from one another. Sure, I do understand there are numerous programs with extensive crossover, such as UFO crash retrieval teams operated with ISR or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance support from the NRO, NURO, and NGA, logistics support from the CIA DS&T, as well as Office of Global Access, transport from the U.S. Army 160th SOAR, aka the Night Stalkers, and direct action from parallel Tier 1 JSOC units, and I outlined all of this in my video on the NRO. But I also believe, with conviction might I add, that much clandestine UFO storage, exploitation, and derivation operations, which can all be categorized under RDT&E, or Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, within an admin level is compartmentalized and, as I said before, siloed. For example, programs within US Army and US Air Force in the early 21st century likely both attempted to adapt electro-optic cloaking systems from downed NHI craft to use on US air and ground platforms, but with little to no cooperation, communication, or consolidation with the opposing branch of the US Armed Forces. Below the administration level in my program framework is where I differ greatly from many prominent figures in the UFO field. I strongly disagree with Hal Puthoff, for example, who states that UFO legacy programs are relegated to defense industrial base prime contractors, such as Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, to protect the programs from the Freedom of Information Act.
As we look at the actual structure of the interaction between the government and private industry in this UAP area, over the years it has morphed, transitioned into it being largely under the aegis of the contractors. If you do something within the government, eventually it can be accessed by Freedom of Information Act. But if you do something through contractors, they're not available through Freedom of Information Act.
I vehemently believe that most, not all, but most, UFO legacy programs operate not without oversight, as many like to claim, but instead parallel, stripped oversight channels. In my view, such programs are run extremely strictly to maximize efficiency while minimizing read-in personnel, ensuring flawless program security and protection while keeping technological breakthroughs in-house. It is for this exact reason that I believe that FFRDCs, or federally funded research and development centers, are the next step down in legacy program structure. These GOCOs, or government-owned contractor-operated institutions, such as the MITRE Corporation, Aerospace Corporation, RAND Corporation, and DOE/NNSA National Labs, such as Sandia, Los Alamos, and Oak Ridge, operate as subject matter experts and R&D program aces within the legacy programs, serving the long-term and specialized science and technology needs required by their program sponsors that could not accomplish these in-house. I hypothesize FFRDCs are a useful tool harnessed by the pyramid to act as the arbiter of information to the lowest level and least secure level of the pyramid, defense industrial base contractors such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, SAIC, etc. Indeed, I have gone on record before to state I strongly wager most individuals within defense contractors engaged with UFO programs don't even know what they're working on. In my opinion, it is specifically SAP security specialists and corporate directors for special programs within contractors that actually possess prior knowledge of TUO programs. And this will become very pertinent to today. And finally, the material that comprises the pyramid and mortar that binds together this legacy program structure of mine. Well, this would be the Defense Industrial Base, whose authoritative channels are often bypassed to allow UFO legacy programs to harness any U.S. military and intelligence assets needed to accomplish these clandestine mission directives, and the limestone casing to protect the pyramid from the elements and exposure. SAPs, CAPs, USAPs, carve-out contracts, program protection offices like the DARPA Security and Intelligence Directorate, Air Force Office of Special Investigation, Department of Energy Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, Sean Kirkpatrick, etc. Now, I know this is already a lot for an introduction, and we have not even discussed the topic of today's video. All of this is to illustrate that legacy program structure is not as simple as a nebulous and untraceable group of compartments within the USG, military, and intelligence community. Additionally, I outline a plethora of critical components that comprise UFO legacy programs here, because I am at odds with what I consider an egregious falsity outlined in the Age of Disclosure documentary.
What else you want to know?
Within the doc, Luis Elizondo and Eric Davis outlines the quote-unquote legacy program, singular and monolithic. This legacy program apparently contains the CIA DS&T at the top, with DS&T Deputy Director in complete charge over the Crash Retrieval portfolio, with the Department of Energy, defense contractors, and Air Force all on an equal level below the agency. This, to me, is a catastrophic oversimplification and terrible omission of involvement. While I agree that all four institutions outlined by the documentary are absolutely involved in legacy programs, I do believe this outline was constructed by figures delegating who gets to catch the live hand grenade. Recently, I investigated the National Reconnaissance Office's involvement in UFO legacy programs, and spent a significant amount of time analyzing where I believe many of the NRO's legacy programs are held. This being NRO acquisitions alongside the DoD/IC elements that control NRO acquisitions, as well as investigating alleged gatekeepers and high-level legacy personnel within the NRO. Since the NRO was ultimately formed to consolidate reconnaissance activities between the U.S. Air Force and CIA, and the NRO's role within the programs was grossly oversimplified and misrepresented within the Age of Disclosure, I think it is only fair we now shift our sights to the greatest air power in the world, the U.S. Air Force.
The future waits for no one, so we refuse to wait for it. We're not just pilots and engineers, we are pioneers. Today, battles are waged in nanoseconds, and planes are piloted from the other side of the world. We turn night into day and fly missions in space. The future's not coming, it's already here. This is the future. Join us and be the future.
The Air Force is integrally entwined with the subject of unidentified flying objects, from decades of aerial sightings by military pilots, to endless claims the Air Enforcement Branch of the U.S. Armed Forces engages with UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering. And it is for this reason this investigation will be very different from my regular projects. This project will not seek to tread over already established paths. While we will summarize key milestones and public claims surrounding the Air Force and UFO legacy program operations, the goal of this video is to analyze with extreme scrutiny and prejudice the modern-day 21st century Air Force UFO legacy programs. Yes, today's investigation will seek to unmask and outline the current modern-day legacy program structure within the Air Force. This investigation is so robust and complex that I will do another thing that I have never done before. And this is to conduct an executive summary listing all of my findings before our thorough investigation. And last thing before we get into this, I know I use a lot of acronyms. This video will be no exception, as we will be actively exploring compartments within the US Air Force. So please guys, bear with me here. I will do my best to list acronyms, challenging concepts, and visual representations for Air Force compartments on screen. Although complex with endless names, places, and acronyms to track and at times hard to rationalize, I do firmly believe this project may be my most important work to date. With all that out of the way, let us seek to investigate 3 simple questions. Does the Air Force engage in UFO recovery, storage, exploitation, and derivation programs? And if so, how are these programs structured today, and what critical people are involved? This investigation will lead us down winding paths, curious compartments, to hidden figures and astonishing capabilities within the Air Force. Due to the complexity and amount of information in this project, perhaps it is imperative to detail an executive summary and present my findings before diving into the research and evidence. With that being said, this project began as a top-down overview of the Air Force's organizational chart that encompasses the entire Air Force organization called the DAF, or the Department of the Air Force, to accurately identify major Air Force compartments engaged with UFO retrievals and RDT&E. And similar to what I said in our intro, I do not believe legacy programs exist throughout the Air Force at large, but instead are tucked away into relevant directorates, offices, major commands, etc., that possess personnel with a need to know to access and facilitate the programs, as well as the relevant infrastructure to operate within the programs. This project actually bypasses the tip of the spear of the Air Force, the civilian-led Secretary of the Air Force, and directly labels elements of the HAF, or the headquarters of the Air Force, the top-level Air Force military staff, that supports directly the Secretary of the Air Force and Air Force Chief of Staff as housing UFO legacy program operations. And that will lead us to our first major revelation that we will explore today. I would like to directly state the vast majority of Air Force UFO legacy program operations reside within the Air Force Secretariat, specifically Air Force Acquisition, or SAF-AQ. Throughout this project, I will label several directorates under SAF-AQ and its Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics as serving imperative roles in the Air Force's efforts to retrieve, down, and exploit non-human technical vehicles. These being SAF-AQL, or Air Force Special Programs, SAF-AQX, or Acquisition Integration, and SAF-AQR, or Science, Technology, and Engineering. Indeed, I believe the controlling entity with oversight of Air Force acquisition legacy programs is an office praised for its accelerated methods for developing, acquiring, and fielding critical combat capabilities. An office with the ability to operate within the gray area of standard acquisition without bureaucratic oversight or hurdles, with access to near limitless funding. The Air Force Acquisition Rapid Capabilities Office, or RCO. Outside of SAF-AQ and RCO, I will outline several offices under the Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. These will include SAF-AAH, Sensitive Activities, and SAF-AAZ, Security/Special Programs Oversight/Info Protection. Ultimately, I will propose a theory that actual RDT&E of exotic vehicles and derivative technologies are conducted out of Air Staff compliance under Air Force Test and Evaluation, or AFTE. and explore test and evaluation subordinate three-letter organizations, and these include AFTEP, or Policy and Programs, AFTER, or Resource Integration, and AFTEZ, the Special Programs Division. And I will investigate how day-to-day operations of legacy programs housed within the headquarters of the Air Force are actually supported by the next layer of the Air Force structural pyramid, and these are MAJCOMS, or Major Commands. Out of the 9 active MAJCOMs, we will solo out Air Combat Command, ACC, Air Force Special Operations Command, or AFSOC, Air Mobility Command, or AMC, and most critically, Air Force Materiel Command, or AFMC. This will lead us to analyze the history of AFMC and its precursor entities that connects shockingly to prior crash retrieval events I have covered in the past, and analyze AFMC's component units, including Air Force Research Lab, AFRL, and the Air Force Test Center, AFTC, formerly the Air Force Flight Test Center, AFFTC. And ultimately, we will arrive at a thesis that multiple Air Force Major Range and Test Facility Bases, or MRTFBs, including the UTTR, Utah Test and Training Range, NTTR, Nevada Test and Training Range, and most critically, the Edwards 412th Test Wing, operate under the Air Force Test Center along with the above-listed entities to perform RDT&E, or again, Research Development Test and Evaluation, of both non-human vehicles that humans have found a way to interface with and derivative technologies or alien reproduction vehicles. And of course, guys, you know me. We will analyze the programs from a program protection lens and produce the AFOSI PJ, or Air Force Office of Special Investigations Special Projects, along with their cadre of FBI agents, as the insider and outsider threat protection element to programs focused on non-human technical vehicles. Of course, in the NRO project, I took a risk introducing 13 possible gatekeepers and high-level legacy personnel. Most of these names had been discussed by me or others in the public realm before, so there was actually relatively little risk here. Therefore, I say strap in, because in this project, I will produce names of alleged legacy program gatekeepers and personnel that I actually encourage the administration to subpoena or serve interrogatories to that I guarantee you have never heard before. After all, our study of AFOSI PJ will lead us to the gatekeeper of UFO SAPs and USAPs that I consider a truly evil boogeyman, a name that I believe I might be taking on a great personal risk by discussing. This being one Mr. Terry Phillips, Senior Executive Service, former PJ Executive Director and Air Force Special Access Program Security Director, and current Vice President for Security at Northrop Grumman. And we will also investigate Phillips' successor in both PJ and Air Force SAPs, Special Agent Lee M. Russ. We will also identify Senior Executive Service Tier 2 personnel, Russell E. Weiler, former Director of SAF AAH, or Sensitive Activities, and William E. McClure, former Director, Security, Special Program Oversight and Information Protection, or SAF AAZ, and actually argue why I believe one of these two men was listed as the Air Force SES-2 gatekeeper by Christopher Mellon in a redacted signal exchange. As I wrap up this executive summary, I cannot stress enough the importance of the Rapid Capabilities Office under acquisition, again RCO. So we will also identify Director and Program Executive Officer for the Department of the Air Force RCO, Mr. Randall G. Walden. Numerous, and I mean numerous more names will be listed throughout this project, such as Lawrence J. Delaney, Sue C. Payton, Don Dunlop, and many more. But I cannot stress enough the importance of this select group of individuals that I would consider hostile witnesses as gatekeepers and extremely senior legacy program personnel. And I'll list them again just so nothing gets lost in translation. Terry Phillips, Lee Russ, William McClure, Russell Weiler, and Randall Walden. There is so much more in today's project. I fully recommend sticking with me throughout the whole thing. But with that being said, let's go ahead and investigate. As I stated in the beginning of this video, the direct goal of this project is to investigate and unveil the modern-day structure of Air Force-led UFO legacy programs. To do so, I think it is imperative to investigate the skeleton of the Department of the Air Force, or DAF. Directorates and positions within the headquarters of the Air Force, the HAF. Air Force Major Commands, or MAJCOMS, detachments within MAJCOMS, Air Force Major Range and Test Facility Bases, or MRTFBs. This project will grow increasingly and incredibly complex, so bear with me here as we work through some complicated relationships, acronyms, naming conventions, etc. Recall my UFO legacy program pyramid. I do think it pertinent to begin our analysis of Air Force legacy programs within the program admin layer of my pyramid. As I state often, I do not think the overwhelming majority of UFO legacy programs are contractor-led and run with a complete lack of oversight. Indeed, I strongly believe such programs are conducted with strict, stripped, and parallel chains of oversight. From what I understand, the vast majority of legacy programs harness the defense industrial base and elements of the DoD/IC to accomplish these exotic missions that requires unrivaled secrecy, funding mechanisms, scientific and technical prowess, RDT&E expertise, etc., and thus massage the US black budget, and exploit SAPs, USAPs, and CAPs to render these programs completely inaccessible to those not read in, even presidents who are considered quote-unquote temporary employees. Whilst SAPs, USAPs, and CAPs are already programs critical to US national security, bolstered by strict controls, need-to-know access, and security measures, such programs are still reported to Congress, regardless of how deeply entrenched they are in the US black budget. Thus, this is why legacy program operations likely introduce further classifications to special access programs, making such programs waived and bigoted, and sprinkle on some creative Department of Energy classifications inherited from the 1954 Atomic Energy Agreement, such as special nuclear materials, non-contract foreign intelligence information, and trans-classified foreign nuclear information, to keep these programs inaccessible from even the US Gang of 8. I really can't think of anyone who explains this better than David Grush himself.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself about ATs, advanced technologies that the U.S. government has?
Based on conventional advanced tech, I was briefed to the preponderance of the Defense Department's both space and aerospace compartment of programs, yeah.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Complicated question. So there's, some, I would call it abuse here. So congressional oversight of conventional special access programs, so I'll use Title 10, so DoD as an example, right? So 10 U.S. Code Section 119 discusses congressional oversight of SAPs, discusses the DepSecDef's ability to waive congressional reporting. However, the Gang of 8 is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or waive bigoted, unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
To peek behind the veil of such extensive program security and protection, I believe we can find value in uncovering Air Force legacy program structure by expecting to peel back numerous layers and glance between the lines of a complex organizational structure to decipher where legacy programs lie and are executed through a strict chain of command and oversight. Indeed, just like my UFO Legacy Program pyramid, I think we can find tremendous value in working our way down the Air Force organizational structure pyramid. So let's work our way down here, focusing majorly on the HAF, Headquarters of the Air Force, MAJCOMS, Major Commands, NAFs, Numbered Air Forces, and Wings. And don't worry, I'll explain all of these in greater detail. Let's start by reviewing this organizational chart of the DAF, or Department of Air Force, and yeah, I know, a lot of acronyms already. The DAF exists as the overarching entity encompassing the entirety of the Air Force and Space Force, led by the civilian position of the Secretary of the Air Force. Within the DAF exists the HAF, or Headquarters of the Air Force, which refers to the Air Staff, the top military leadership supporting the Secretary of the Air Force. I think by analyzing specific compartments within the DAF, specifically the HAF, we can clearly identify and isolate critical components engaged in Air Force Legacy Program efforts. Think back to some of my other work and extend some examples here, such as how much I talk about the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology in support of CIA programs, or the USD ANS, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, under the Secretary of Defense, in support of both NRO and National Security Council programs. Because I believe analyzing the HAF, or again, Headquarters of the Air Force, in support of the Secretary of the Air Force is a mere pursuit and will bear much fruit. So, where do we turn our attention first? Well, just like I did in my NRO project, let us go ahead and look to Air Force acquisition. Within the upper echelons of the Headquarters of the Air Force, or again the HAF, resides Air Force Acquisitions, or SAF-AQ, as I will refer to it from here on out. SAF-AQ is chiefed by the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and like a running theme of today, is comprised of multiple subordinate directorates. And if you've been paying attention so far, you already know we will zero in on specific directorates under SAF-AQ. And just here, take a second to already observe layers within layers in the Air Force. Under the Secretary of the Air Force exists numerous HAF positions supporting the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, including the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, itself comprised of multiple subdirectorates. SAF-AQ, quote, oversees Air Force research, development, acquisition, and program sustainment activities, totaling an annual budget in excess of $60 billion for more than 550 acquisition programs, end quote, and operates under the vision to, quote, deliver enduring world-class capabilities to assure air, space, and cyberspace dominance for the nation and our allies, end quote. Historically, SAF-AQ has provided direction, guidance, and supervision of all matters pertaining to the formulation, review, approval, and execution of acquisition plans, policies, and programs, and these include the F-35 Lightning II and B-21 Raider programs. Not only is SAF-AQ responsible for Air Force Science and Technology, or S&T matters, but also, quote, basic research, applied research, and advanced technology development, including the Air Force portion of joint programs, end quote, as well as a whole list of other responsibilities, including the governance of developing, planning, prototyping, and experimentation efforts, technology integration into Air Force requirements and pre-acquisition program planning, management of and policy relating to the Air Force Manufacturing Technology Program, Air Force contracting, research, development, production, and product support of weapons, direct collaboration with AFTE, or test and evaluation, and so much more. SAF-AQ is so critical to Air Force science and technology efforts. The position is in charge of appointing the commander of the Air Force Research Lab, or AFRL, the primary R&D arm of the Air Force, and piece of Air Force Material Command, AFMC MAJCOM, as a technology executive officer for select programs. So what I just said, that SAF-AQ and AFRL work closely, remember this, as later in the project, specifically on the MAJCOM section, I will make some insane ties between AFRL and a little-known character who is somewhat famous on this channel, the illustrious Dr. Eric H. Wang. So yeah, if programs exist focused on the recovery, storage, exploitation, and derivation of non-human technologies, SAF-AQ would likely be one of the OPRs, or Offices of Primary Responsibility, dealing with these deep-sixed USAPs. But before we go any further on SAF-AQ, remember that acquisitions are not a new topic to my investigations. After all, the crux of my NRO investigation into legacy programs was that indeed NRO programs are likely housed within NRO acquisitions, controlled by departments under the SecDef and ODNI. Indeed, I now recall mention of one witness, Ed, who will appear time and time again throughout this video, and has appeared time and time throughout my project portfolio. Ed served several positions within both the Air Force Test Center AFTC at the Edwards 412th Test Wing as an Air Force officer and at the Pentagon as a civilian. As I have discussed ad nauseum on this channel, Ed possesses years of first-hand experience within a quote-unquote hidden wing out in the Western Air Force ranges, an extensive, waived, and deep-sixed set of programs across the Nevada Test and Training Range, Edwards 412 Test Wing, Dugway, Utah Test and Training Range, all MRTFBs by the way, and other DoD sites to test and evaluate recovered non-human vehicles, as well as derivative vehicles one might call alien reproduction vehicles that employ, let's just say, exotic and non-conventional propulsion systems. Again, Ed and the 412th Test Wing MRTFB will come up again later on in this project. However, let's chat about my prior video on Ed. Ed was a witness who approached Stephen Greer, so during a frantic year-plus-long effort to actually contact Ed and speak to him myself, I had to rely on Stephen Greer's notes and documents on Ed's testimonies, whilst comparing them against Ed's real and very prestigious CV. Due to Ed's CV, I did indeed believe Greer's retelling of Ed's disclosures. But guys, due to recent events I am keeping intentionally vague, my confidence in Ed's testimony has grown 10,000-fold, and I've managed to garner myriad new insights into Ed's first-hand experience within the programs. So let's get to our relevance to our current chapter here. Ed's CV is riddled with acquisition, and following his time within the quote-unquote hidden wing, Ed served in the Pentagon connected to none else but SAF-AQ. It was in SAF-AQ that Ed learned that during consecutive fiscal years, 30 to 40% of total Air Force TOA, or Total Obligation Authority budget, was actually slashed and sent to the Air Force black budget before any analysis and assessment by Air Force FM, or financial management. This SAF-AQ siphoning of TOA funds into the black budget and programs focused on the T&E of derivative vehicles or alien reproduction vehicles is a direct example of egregious misappropriation of funds occurring within the headquarters of the Air Force under SAF-AQ.
Well, so then how does, I don't want to cut you off, but how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
Does that mean
self-fund.
does that mean that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
So, SAF-AQ deals with cutting-edge Air Force acquisition, RDT&E, and science and technology. And according to Ed, is actually an inflection point where funds go black. So before we dive into directorates under SAF-AQ, what else can we learn here? Perhaps, just perhaps, by analyzing prior individuals to hold the prestigious Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics position, we can find some individuals we can connect to UFO legacy programs. To start, from 1991 to 1992, SAF-AQ was spearheaded by one Lawrence J. Delaney. Delaney's career history is certainly rather engaging and appears similar to other gatekeepers we have talked about before on this channel, such as Mary Kay Sturtevant, and gatekeepers we will talk about today, such as Terry Phillips. After earning his PhD in chemical engineering, Delaney worked at the Institute for Defense Analyses from 1961 to 1962, a federally funded research and development center, FFRDC, sponsored by the DoD that actually used to house the late former presidential advisor Harold Malmgren. Indeed, I believe Malmgren's IDA position was a NOC, or non-official cover position, for his actual work within the CIA. After IDA, Delaney would move on to Aerospace Corporation, another FFRDC I strongly suspect engages in UFO legacy programs, as director of its Propulsion Technology and Systems Study Group. Following the Aerospace Corporation, Delaney moved on to Martin Marietta as Director of Advanced Programs and Director of its Navy Systems Division. Martin Marietta, of course, was one half of the now largest defense contractor in the world, the illustrious Lockheed Martin. I strongly believe that even pre-merger, Martin Marietta engaged in such UFO programs. And please watch my Lockheed video to learn so much more there. Delaney would then join Science Applications International Corporation, infamously known as SAIC, as Deputy Sector Manager for Military Science and Information Systems Sector, and then as Manager of its Information Systems Group. Just as with Lockheed, if mention of SAIC does not make any alarm bells go off in your head, go watch my video on that. And shortly before his position as Assistant Secretary for the Air Force AT&L, Delaney would even work for Braddock, Dunn & McDonald, BDM, a contractor actually purchased by Northrop Grumman that, like the Aerospace Corporation, Martin Marietta, and SAIC, has a storied history of UFO legacy program accusations. I certainly think a reasonable argument can be made. Delaney indeed had exposure to UFO programs even before his tenure as head of SAF-AQ. Let's also investigate Sue C. Payton, also former SecAF AT&L, or again, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition Technology and Logistics. Forgive me if I use the SecAF AT&L acronym from here on out, the former word is just so much to say. Anyways, Sue C. Payton served this position from 2006 to 2009 under George W. Bush. And if her name rings any bells to you, I actually briefly mentioned her in my project on SAIC. Prior to her position within SAF-AQ, beginning in 1989, Payton worked as Senior Site Systems Integration Manager for Martin Marietta, and then continued on in Lockheed Martin post-merge until 1997 as Manager of Advanced Technology in the Office of the Vice President of Lockheed Martin. Other former SAF-AQ heads, like John J. Welch Jr., enjoyed storied careers at LTV Aerospace, a former contractor that would become a CIA shell company called E-Systems, that I explored regarding accusations of LTV Aerospace designing electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to shoot down UFOs in my NRO project. Indeed, in 8 of 14 of the former SAF-AQs, we can find in-depth corporate history prior to government service, featuring many of the contractors I've accused of engaging in UFO legacy programs. And again, 8 of 14 prior SecAF AT&Ls include either one or multiple of Lockheed Martin, SAIC, Northrop Grumman, TRW, LTV Electro Systems or Aerospace, and General Dynamics. Just as our running theme of analyzing compartments within compartments here, I want to analyze specific directorates within SAF-AQ that I either strongly believe or actually have direct knowledge engage with UFO legacy programs. These include, to list out before we dive in, SAF-AQR, aka Science, Technology, and Engineering, SAF-AQX, aka Acquisition Integration, and SAF-AQL, aka Special Programs.
America's future will be determined by your dreams and your visions.
For some of you will travel where no man has ever traveled before. Some of you will fly the fastest planes that have ever been built. reach the highest altitude that man has ever gone to.
Whether you serve in the skies above or on the ground below, each of you has stepped forward to defend your country.
The American people support you. They are counting on you, and they believe you truly do represent the best of America.
SAF-AQL, or special programs, quote, directs SAP advanced technology development programs and monitors new technologies which may satisfy operational requirements or capitalize on technology opportunities in coordination with the SAF-AQR, or again, Science, Technology, and Engineering, end quote. Indeed, this directorate under SECAF-ATNL manages the development and execution of highly classified and sensitive acquisition programs within the Air Force. SAF-AQL, quote, serves as the principal acquisition advisor to the SECAF, CSAF, Undersecretary of the Air Force, USECAF, and SAF-AQ on all matters involving special access programs, and liaises with other military services, defense agencies, and federal departments to ensure cross-fertilization of advanced technologies and concepts to explore the potential for joint cooperation activities, end quote. Within its duties, AQL plans, programs, directs, and accomplishes research, development, test, and evaluation, or one of my most used acronyms, RDT&E, for promising advanced air, space, and cyber capabilities. As we just stated, SAF-AQL Special Programs works closely with SAF-AQR, Science, Technology, and Engineering. And as you'll come to find out here, I think there's quite a bit of value in exploring that relationship. SAF-AQR, quote, serves as the Air Force Science and Technology Executive to represent, advocate, and defend the Air Force S&T program to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, OSD, the other services, and Congress, end quote. Indeed, SAF-AQR specifically, as we discussed earlier, interfaces with Technology Executive Officers, TUOs, from the Air Force Research Lab, AFRL, under Air Force MATERIEL Command, AFMC, for all Air Force Science and Technology programs. SAF-AQR and AFRL Commander work closely with the OSD, or again, the Office of the Secretary of Defense Funding and Program Management Structure, for several technology transfer vessels, and again, think back to Ed and his time in Air Force acquisition at the Pentagon. I guess then it should really be no surprise here that the USD ANS, or Undersecretary for Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, a department within the OSD I recently identified as an integral administrator to NRO UFO legacy programs, partners with the SAF-AQ. I then can't help but wonder if the National Security Council utilizes partnerships between USD ANS and SAF-AQ, specifically SAF-AQR, for clandestine UFO-related purposes and possibly use technology transfer vessels to slash, budget, or hide materials. What I find equally interesting here is the relationship between SAF-AQR and SAF-AQL. SAF-AQR, quote, integrates special access program and non-SAP RDT&E, S&T planning activities and strategies, and directs advanced technology development programs and monitors new technologies in coordination with SAF-AQL, end quote. This is really important, so let me say that again. What did we just read there? That SAF-AQR and SAF-AQL coordinate on Air Force RDT&E SAPs and together monitor new technologies. While I certainly strongly suspect, and I would wager that you do too, that within this scope of responsibility are Deep Sixth RDT&E SAPs focused on the recovery and exploitation of quote-unquote new technologies of unknown origin. The last trio of directorates under SECAF-ATNL I want to talk about, SAF-AQX, aka Acquisition Integration, is not such a low-hanging fruit as special programs and science, technology, and engineering. SAF-AQX could be thought of as the lubricant that helps a well-oiled machine run smoothly and efficiently. AQX, Acquisition Integration, oversees and quote, develops and implements plans, policies, and procedures related to Air Force acquisition management, reporting, structure, and execution, end quote. So, whilst we have AQR and AQL coordinate on clandestine RDT&E SAPs, it is the AQX that helps ensure operations run smoothly and efficiently with their administration and management role. One of SAF AQX's most critical tasks is continuous process improvement support to a variety of Air Force teams identifying both near-term and long-term, as well as lasting strategic and tactical changes to Air Force processes. Per its name, Acquisition Integration SAF AQX additionally operates in a role of integration and oversight, consolidating requests for the release of funds, reviewing program performance metrics, and ensuring overall acquisition policies are implemented consistently. So, as per our investigation so far, SAF AQ and its subcomponents, AQX, AQL, and AQR, alongside standard Air Force acquisition frameworks, deal with the most highly secretive and clandestine science and technology projects relegated to SAPs and USAPs in the entire Air Force. As I state often, UFO legacy programs operate not without oversight, but under their own strict oversight channels that minimize eyes on the programs and read-in personnel, and maximizes efficiency, program protection, and compartmentalization. Therefore, the question must be asked: is there a vehicle within SAF AQ that would allow AQ to engage with UFO legacy program operations while completely sidestepping congressional reporting in the standard red tape bureaucratic process? Well, of course the answer here is yes. And this would be the Department of the Air Force's Rapid Capabilities Office, or RCO, that resides within acquisition under the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. RCO has accelerated methods for developing, acquiring, and fielding critical combat capabilities. This office, quote, preserves the strength of U.S. ingenuity and innovation without the rigidity of traditional acquisition, end quote. With an assigned personnel of less than 200 individuals, the RCO delivers capabilities at the speed of emerging threats. Specifically here, the RCO expedites the development and fielding of select Department of Defense combat support and weapons systems, leverages defense-wide technology development efforts and existing operational capabilities, provides integration and technical support to other services or U.S. government activities, conducts independent operational and technical assessment of weapons or combat support system capabilities and vulnerabilities, takes on new challenges to accelerate operationally focused capabilities, and much more. Today, the DAF RCO portfolio includes several high-priority developmental and experimental programs, and these include the B-21 Raider, the successor to the B-2 Spirit bomber, and the X-37B orbit test vehicle. Now, what is most interesting to me is who the RCO reports to. As we just discussed, Air Force acquisition would require a strict oversight chain with minimal eyes and interference to run UFO programs. And of course, the RCO does just that, with key operating principles of the RCO including a, quote, short and narrow chain of command, early and prominent warfighter involvement, and funding stability, end quote. And this is where it gets interesting. The office the RCO reports to, well, this is a board of directors chaired by none other than the USD ANS, or Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. We've already talked about the USD ANS, but if you view my channel regularly, this should set off massive alarm bells, as a critical component of my NRO video was exploring relationships between UFO Legacy Program gatekeepers/personnel and the NRO and USD ANS, or its former name, the USD ANT. This board, chaired by the USD ANS that directs the RCO, includes the Secretary of the Air Force, Air Force Chief of Staff, the Chief of Space Operations, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. It is my expressed understanding from individuals with first-hand experience in Air Force legacy programs that the RCO can take SAF-AQ involvement in such programs and package it neatly as a controlling office, built to operate within the gray area of standard acquisition. This in turn allows Air Force Acquisition and the Office of the ASECAF AT&L to operate UFO legacy programs outside of congressional oversight, Air Force oversight, as well as temporary executive branch employees like presidents. Perhaps then, we may find value in unmasking and analyzing the current RCO Director and Program Executive Officer, or PEO, and member of the Senior Executive Service, a man I would encourage the current presidential administration to serve ample interrogatories to, Randall G. Walden. Before his tenure as Director and PEO of RCO, Walden was commissioned in the Air Force in 1982 and, quote, served as a flight test engineer within Air Force Materiel Command at Edwards Air Force Base, California, Patuxent River Naval Air Station, Maryland, and Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. During his tours as a flight test engineer, Mr. Walden participated in the development, ground, and flight testing of numerous aerospace weapons systems, end quote. Edwards, Nellis, Pax River, Air Force Materiel Command, which we will discuss later, and aerospace weapons systems should stand out as a red alert when investigating an individual with legacy program experience, as I believe these are critical Air Force program elements. What is super interesting to me is that from 1997 to 1998, Walden would actually serve as commander within a classified flight test squadron out of Nellis Air Force Base. Walden also served myriad roles within the Air Force Directorate of Special Programs, including Deputy Chief of Advanced Technology Division, Chief of the Special Studies Division, and Technical Director. Finally, before he took over as Director and PEO of RCO, Walden served as Director for Air Force Test and Evaluation, or AFTE. AFTE, as we discussed in the executive summary, will soon be a critical component of our investigations. According to a rare speech given at Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies given in 2018, RCO facilitates over 30 programs, equally secret or more secret to the B-21 Raider or X-37B. Why don't we go ahead and listen to Walden speak about this himself? Because apparently, according to Walden, RCO under his watch is actually based on Lockheed Skunk Works in the early days of the NRO.
And so what you see is, on the far left, we stole and plagiarized some of the models that existed, because this nation and industry and actually government agencies have done streamlined and tailored acquisition and requirements process for years. I pick a little bit from the Lockheed Skunk Works model. Kelly Johnson shown up there. He has 15 rules. We typically use 10 of those 15. For the most part, the National Reconnaissance Office in the early days was very streamlined and got things done fairly quickly. And again, both from a requirements as well as an acquisition process point of view.
Although it is quite dry, I do recommend checking out this speech given by Walden. Walden's answers do seem like something fed back from ChatGPT on standard acquisition processes, but it is intriguing to hear him discuss just how rapid RCO is with a team of just 200 to 250 people. Now, remember this for later. Walden in this speech goes specifically out of his way to thank OSI or AFOSI for safeguarding the most secretive of RCO projects.
Access to, I'll say, the security pieces out there. We lean heavily on Air Force OSI. They help us through most of the programs that we do, and that access, in my mind, is fairly critical in the execution of certainly any of the Defense Department type weapon systems, but more important, associated with actually securing the information we don't want to have our adversaries to get, and or securing information that makes sense in having a capability for the future that you're not having to update or modernize based on a leak of information.
With the utmost confidence, and I mean utmost confidence, I suspect that SAF-AQ, specifically the Directorates of Special Programs, Acquisition Integration, and Science, Technology, and Engineering, are imperative to UFO RDT&E operations, specifically programs involving derivative, non-human technologies, and that these Air Force acquisition subcomponents utilize the Rapid Capabilities Office to execute their tasking of UFO legacy programs with their own umbrella oversight authority and unlimited access to TOA funds thanks to the RCO. When we discuss stripped oversight channels within legacy programs, this is exactly what I mean. While the entirety of the headquarters of the Air Force supporting the Secretary of the Air Force are likely completely unaware or denied access into UFO legacy programs, several ultra-specific components, directorates, and departments that would be mandatory to accomplish such massive-scale exotic retrievals and RDT&E are absolutely engaged in these bigoted, deep sixth-waved, unacknowledged USAPs. And at the very end here, since this project aims to uncover the modern-day UFO legacy program structure within the Air Force, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a senior Air Force general officer connected to SAF-AQ that I allege is involved within UFO legacy program operations. Lieutenant General Donna D. Shipton currently serves as commander of the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, with additional duties as Air Force Program Executive Officer for Combat Readiness and Integrating PEO for Mission Systems. Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, AFL-CMC, is one of 6 centers reporting to Air Force Materiel Command, which we will touch on in much greater detail later on. Immediately prior to her position under AFMC, Shipton served a very senior role within SAF-AQ. From August 2022 to December 2023, Shipton served as military deputy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for AT&L. At SAF-AQ, Shipton was, quote, responsible for research and development, test, production support, and modernization of Air Force programs worth more than $60 billion annually, end quote. And as I talk about in so many of my videos, and I love referencing the work of Catherine Austin Fitts, with UFO legacy programs, we are looking at figures not just billions, but possibly trillions. I do not think it is inconceivable for the Air Force total program requirements for RDT&E and reverse engineering of non-human vehicles totals over the figures of hundreds of billions into the low trillions. Though I do not have a trail to expand on this now, I highly encourage you to keep LTG Shipton in your mind moving forward, and strongly encourage the administration to pass on a friendly subpoena. Outside of Air Force acquisitions in the RCO, there are actually several more elements of the HAF I believe are absolutely imperative to our discussion today. And the 2 we will talk about are actually sister departments called SAF-AAH, or Sensitive Activities, and SAF-AAZ, Security/Special Programs Oversight/Info Protection. And just note, these organizations have undergone some name changes in the last couple of years, but I still think SAF-AAZ and AAH is our best way to reference these offices. SAF-AAH and SAF-AAZ fall under the Administrative Assistant of the Secretary of the Air Force within, of course, the headquarters of the Air Force. Sensitive activities here, SAF-AAH, according to a 2014 HAF Mission Directive, with OPR, or again, Office of Primary Responsibility, being the SAF-AAH. We can learn that this office exists as a directorate within the SAF-AA, or again, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. Very little, and I mean very little, is publicly available about Air Force sensitive activities. But fortunately, this 2014 HAF directive can tell us just a little bit more. We can learn that SAF-AAH, quote, serves as the United States Air Force Office of Primary Responsibility and single enterprise to address immediate and emerging combat Air Force, Combat Support Agency, and combatant commanders' mission needs involving sensitive activities and operational concepts. This includes those sensitive activities as defined in DoD S-5210.36, involving other non-DoD federal departments and agencies, end quote. Believe it or not, I reckon even such a short blurb gives us quite a bit to chew through. Classified DoD Directive S-5210.36 was established on 6 November 2008 and is titled, quote, Provision of DoD-sensitive support to DoD components and other departments and agencies of the U.S. government, end quote. While we cannot really decipher these quote-unquote sensitive activities under this classified DoD directive, perhaps we can decipher some meaningful information from analyzing the Office of Primary Responsibility for this directive that the SAF-AAH operates to satisfy. This OPR for SAF-AAH operations under this classified directive, well, this would be the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, or as you know I like to say, USD-INS. USD-INS, just like USD-ANS, is a high-level department within the OSD, or Office of the Secretary of Defense, that essentially functions as a critical directorate. USD-INS operates within intelligence, counterintelligence, security, sensitive activities, etc. matters for the DoD and even exercises oversight over the DIA, NGA, NRO, and NSA. In my NRO project, of course, we discussed the USD-ANS and its IC counterparts, the DDNI-ATNF. While the USD-INS seems to bridge that gap on its own, as it is actually a dual-hatted role with the director also serving as the Director of Defense Intelligence under the ODNI. Not only do I wager USD-INS is integral to National Security Council UFO legacy programs, but may in fact be one of the most critical linchpins. And you might be asking, why do I theorize the USD-INS is this linchpin to NSC programs? To address that, let's quickly reference here the NPMS, or National Program Special Management Staff, with specific emphasis on the director of NPMS. NPMS director runs coordination between the National Security Council SAPs, of course if you forgot somehow, SAPs are special access programs, and the U.S. Department of Defense/intelligence community. The director of the NPMS is one of the most critical jobs in the entirety of the United States that I'm willing to bet most people have actually never even heard of. The director of NPMS is usually the most cleared person in the entire DoD, besides the Secretary of Defense. Indeed, the director of the NPMS is even more cleared than the director for the DoD Special Access Program Central Office, or SAPCO. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, you will know how important SAPCO is, as well as the Special Access Program Oversight Committee is to UFO legacy programs. And of course I say this because National Special Program Management staff, including the NPMS director, reside within the USD-INS. But specifically, NPMS falls under USD-INS's intelligence dual-hatted role. This, of course, is again the Director for Defense Intelligence. And NPMS falls under SASP, or Sensitive Activities and Special Programs. Sensitive Activities and Special Programs? Well, does this ring a bell with SAF-AAH Sensitive Activities and SAF-AQL Special Programs? I bet it does. I am really willing to go out on a limb here and not only say that UFO legacy programs out of the National Security Council heavily feature involvement from the USD-INS, but that also one of the most integral, quote-unquote, above-board roles in the entirety of NSC-led UFO programs is indeed the director of NPMS under the USD-INS. And real quick, I can't let this slip away regarding the USD-INS. This is a position you may have heard from before without even realizing it. After all, on 20 July 2022, sitting Undersecretary for Defense for Intelligence and Security, Ronald S. Moultrie, would inform the DoD of the creation of AARO, as well as the installation of Moultrie's good buddy, and legacy program stooge Sean Kirkpatrick as AARO's director. USDINS Moultrie helped establish AARO and provide oversight and direction to AARO in numerous primary lines of operations, including surveillance, collection and reporting, intelligence operations and analysis, science and technology, and more. I think what's missing here is AARO serving as a honeypot for whistleblowers that Moultrie engaged with. Indeed, both Kirkpatrick and Moultrie would enjoy gallivanting around together in 2022, dismissing the topic of UFOs outright. Sean Kirkpatrick, a man whose lies, deception, and interference against whistleblowers will never be forgotten, seemingly punched his ticket following his work with AARO, in my opinion, earning his reward for acting as Legacy Program's public program protection frontman.
You can say categorically you've seen no convincing, confirmable evidence of intact spacecraft kept by the U.S. government?
No. I have seen nothing that leads me to that conclusion.
Is it possible there is some secret program that you're just not aware of?
I don't think so. I have access to anything and everything I need.
By joining Oak Ridge National Labs, FFRDC, as Chief Technology Officer for Defense and Intelligence Programs. Due to several videos exploring rumors of recovered UFO systems analysis at Oak Ridge, I have publicly theorized this position involved Sean Kirkpatrick's introduction to first-hand science and technology work on UFOs. Curiously, Oak Ridge deleted this job posting, and Kirkpatrick does not feature Oak Ridge on his public CV. Moultrie himself is not innocent of deleting job history, in my opinion, to cover his tracks. Sure, Moultrie served as an intelligence advisory board member within the MITRE Corporation, as well as board member for the Better Angel Society, which is owned by the Carlyle Group. But Moultrie also erased Battelle Memorial Institute from his public CV. For nearly 2 years, Moultrie served as an advisory board member for Battelle Memorial Institute. And an intriguing tie between both of these deleted positions between Moultrie and Kirkpatrick. Well, of course, the Oak Ridge National Lab, FFRDC, is managed by none other than Battelle. Incredibly concerning behavior from a former USDINS. But alas, according to my research and understanding, this position is integral to UFO programs. I say all this because I find it intriguing SAF-AAH, or again, sensitive activities, is basically governed by classified directives outlined by the USDINS. I am confident a strong argument could be made further classified DoD directives, whose origins can be traced back to classified presidential executive orders under Presidents Truman and Eisenhower, sees SAF-AAH coordinate with the NPMS and USDINS for modern-day National Security Council crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs. Think about it this way: SAF-AAH sensitive activities addresses immediate combat Air Force, combat support agency, and combatant commanders' mission needs involving sensitive activities and operational concepts under classified USDINS guidelines. What if the combatant commands in question are commands like SOCOM, or Special Operations Command, that requires sensitive activities to operate UFO crash retrievals on foreign soil, with ISR provided by combat support agencies like the NGA? What if Air Combat Command, a major commander MAJCOM headquartered at Langley Air Force Base, seeks to harness asymmetrical warfare advantages by deploying derivative technologies adapted to US airframes? Well, I certainly think this would be a quote-unquote operational concept SAF-AAH would coordinate with the MAJCOM. I mean, just my theory, but possibly this has even happened before. Think back to the testimony of whistleblower and American hero Dylan Borland, who observed a triangular airframe with black flight paint that both displayed puzzling characteristics and seemingly employed an electro-optic cloaking system that appeared like flowing lava outside of the craft. Where did Borland see this craft? Well, of course, over Langley Air Force Base in the mid-2000s.
Mr. Borland, in your testimony, you described witnessing large triangular craft while stationed at Langley Air Force Base in 2012. Can you explain what you observed in terms of size, behavior, and why you're confident it was not conventional technology?
Great question, ma'am. So on the base, I lived in the barracks. There was a little smoke pit outside. I was there on the telephone and looking across to the flight line, and I see a white light pop up and stop about 100 feet in the air. I thought it was a weather balloon. I've seen tests from there before, weeknight, normal thing, not surprising. I actually finished my cigarette and I began walking up towards the flight line. There is a track, and because I was on 3 months of night work, I would walk the track at night when we were weather down. And as I began walking towards the light, towards the flight line and the track, the light then flies across the base, across the flight line, and as it flies to me, a triangle manifests around the light. I can't tell you if it's active camouflage. I can't tell you if it appeared around the light, but I can tell you that it was a white light, and then it was a triangle. It stopped about 100 feet in front of me and approximately 100 feet above me. My telephone got extremely hot, completely froze, dead. I remember how thick it was. It was between 1 to 2 stories thick, equilateral triangle. I could never see the top of it, and the edges were 90 degrees. There were 4 lights in total, 1 light on each corner, and a larger light in the center, 2 to 3 times the size of the corner lights. But what was really odd was the outside. The best way to describe it is like looking at a James Webb telescope picture where you have the colors and then the black background. So the craft itself was this black metallic flake paint, but on top of the craft was this gold, lava, plasma, some type of fluid going over and around the craft. I'm under this for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then the center light flashes 2 to 3 times, no sound, immediately shoots up to commercial jet level minimum, in my opinion, and I immediately feel static electricity all over my body, and then I smell the smell of after a thunderstorm or lightning storm, that really strong summer thunderstorm smell.
Now, this is why I love what I do so much. I would like to now introduce some research from my friend Alex Katz that incidentally dovetails perfectly into our topic today, specifically here, of course, SAF-AAH. On 23 April 2024, Christopher Mellon took to Twitter to release partially redacted screenshots of a signal exchange with an unknown individual. In full transparency before we dive in, I do hesitate to trust Mellon. Outside of his involvement with Lou Elizondo with the fake ATIP cover program, Mellon formerly served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence for the Clinton and Bush administrations, a position that serves under the now USD-INS we discussed today extensively in connection to NSC UFO programs. Additionally, I believe Mellon may be protecting his former SSCI or Senate Select Committee on Intelligence colleague, a career CIA spook and decades-long VP of Lockheed Martin for both government affairs and intelligence joint and science and technology programs, a woman named Mary Sturtevant. Regardless, it is clear that Mellon, Elizondo, and their faction, possibly stemming from the NSC itself, have pushed for limited transparency, and while I disagree with this fully, I do take this exchange seriously. Within this exchange dated 2020, the unknown individual communicating with Mellon stated themselves and others were making massive progress in accessing the UFO crash retrieval portfolio. In a redacted response from Mellon, we can make out the year 1945. Mellon's conversation partner stated their group was dealing with the recovered UFO that landed in Kingman, Arizona in 1953. The Kingman crash is one of my all-time favorite crash retrieval cases, and in my opinion, a real instance of a recovered non-human intelligence craft. I have covered Kingman before, though full transparency, the project is a little bit dated, so at some point I may actually revisit it. Also keep Kingman in your mind, as personnel alleged to have operated on the Kingman craft will be critical to our MAJCOMS section. Anyways, Mellon's partner claimed they had deciphered the management structure and security control system and ownership of the crash retrieval portfolio. Quote, "We also know who recovered landed or crashed UAPs and under what authority. We also know that a still highly classified memo by a Secretary of the Air Force in the 1950s is still in effect to maintain the cover on UAPs." End quote. Not sure why brave men outside of David Grush haven't come forward to reveal this management and security structure, but I do hope this project today partially accomplishes that goal. The partner then stated, quote, "We also know the SES-2, who's the Air Force gatekeeper," end quote, followed by a redacted name. Now again, what is an SES, or Senior Executive Service? SES is a high-level civilian executive role within the federal government. SES personnel handle significant responsibilities just below top political appointees, such as a secretary, director, deputy secretary or deputy director, undersecretary, etc. of a cabinet-level department or agency. SES personnel are equivalent to a flag officer or general officer, and thus an SES-2 you could think of as equivalent to a 2-star or major general. This is where Alex Katz's work comes in and ties into today. Katz sought to decipher this redacted gatekeeper and began by analyzing SES-2 personnel around 2020 who also likely held senior positions in the Air Force, whilst also factoring in total character count in the redacted name. You see, Katz performed analysis on the text and reasoned the gatekeeper's first and last name was a total of 12 characters. This is where Katz arrived upon the name Russell E. Weiler, a member of the Defense Intelligence Senior Executive Service. Weiler enjoyed a distinguished 36 career in the Army, where he retired in 2009. From 2009 to 2024, Weiler served as the director of the Sensitive Activities Office, SAF-AAH, within the Office of the Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, in the headquarters of the Air Force, Arlington, Virginia. From 2024 to 2025, Weiler now serves as the Director of Plans and Effects within the Office of Competitive Activities. And here is where things get interesting. In 2024, the Secretary of the Air Force introduced sweeping changes to quote-unquote re-optimize and modernize the Department of the Air Force. Part of these changes was morphing SAF-AAH sensitive activities into Air Force competitive activities, SAF-OC, under the Director of Plans and Effects, SAF-OCX. SAF-AAH morphing under SAF-OCX in 2024 really isn't that important to our investigation, but it is critical to proving that Weiler is in fact an SES-2. Very little can be found about Weiler online, besides his bio, images of him as a young Army officer, and photos of Weiler within AFJ ROTC News and Notes. I believe he has done a great job, largely scrubbing himself from the internet. But intriguingly, this half chart we have been referencing all day has put Weiler's name right in front of our faces. Yet still, nothing we found yet can prove Weiler is an SES-2. Well, fortunately here, Katz saved this now deleted 2025 job opening under the Office of Competitive Activities, SAF-OC, hiring for the new Director of Plans and Effects, SAF-OCX, Weiler's former position and continuation of SAF-AAH. This job opening implies that Weiler retired around mid-2025. This job opening for Weiler's former position was for Tier 2 SES and DISES only. DISES being Defense Intelligence Senior Executive Service, which was the title that Weiler held. This here definitively proves Director of Plans and Effects under SAF-OCX and Director of Sensitive Activities under SAF-AAH holds an SES-2 position, and thus Weiler was an SES-2. How intriguing is it that Katz's brilliant work has proposed a possible SES-2 gatekeeper for Air Force UFO legacy programs? A possible gatekeeper that also served as Director for Air Force Sensitive Activities, SAF-AAH, for 15 years, who would then go on to serve as the continuation of SAF-AAH in SAF-OCX up to 2025. According to Weiler's bio, quote, he is designated as the Air Force focal point to address immediate, near-term, and emerging combat Air Force, combat support agency, and combatant commander mission needs involving applications and operational concepts employing specialized low-density expertise and sensitive activities managed by other government agencies, end quote. Does this sound familiar? Because recall how SAF-AAH operates under the guidelines of DoD Classified Directive DoDI S-5210.36 under OPR USD INS 4 Combat Air Force, Combat Support Agency, and Combatant Commands that we recently theorized is connected to UFO clandestine operations. Katz's proposition of Weiler under SAF-AAH serving as a high-level Air Force legacy program gatekeeper certainly correlates strongly with our work today. Now, I personally believe that Weiler is one of two possibilities for this SES-2 gatekeeper that Mellon described. I would like to extend my hand in unmasking an individual I believe has a strong argument for Mellon's suspect, but also an individual I am certain has engaged with Air Force legacy programs. Staying under the SAF-AA, or Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force here, we can look to a similar office to Weiler's SAF-AAH sensitive activities and observe SAF-AAZ, Security/Special Program Oversight/Info Protection. By title description alone, you may be already associating info protection with gatekeeping, but let's continue to explore. SAF-AAZ here, quote, provides a strategic policy focus on the Air Force security enterprise and on protection of information across the Air Force, end quote. And another quote here, quote, SAF-AAZ manages the Air Force Information Security Program, to include nuclear information security. And a quick break from this quote, if you have watched even a single one of my videos, you will know how important misclassifying and transclassifying nuclear material is to UFO legacy programs. Back to the quote. Personnel Security Program, an industrial security program, acts as the Air Force focal point for the Insider Threat Program and serves as the Air Force Special Access Program Central Office, SAPCO, and the authorizing official for Air Force SAP systems, end quote. So is there anyone connected to SAF-AAZ that could fit the billet of Mellon's SES-2 gatekeeper? Because I do not think I need to go out on a limb here and state that SAF-AAZ is integral to Air Force legacy program protection. Well, of course, the answer here is yes, and I will volunteer the name William E. McClure and implore the current administration to serve this individual interrogatories or subpoena just as they should Weiler. William E. McClure is a member of the Senior Executive Service Tier 2 and former director of SAF-AAZ from 2019 to 2021. As director of SAF-AAZ, McClure provided, quote, security leadership, policy direction, integration, and oversight of the Air Force Special Access Program and Information Protection Enterprise to protect the nation's most sensitive information, technologies, and capabilities. In this capacity, he is also the functional manager of the Air Force's 2,000-plus member security community, end quote. Now, obviously, McClure's role directly implies program protection strategies, as does his former SES-2 label satisfy Mellon's gatekeeper conditions. Yet recall Katz derived a 12-character name length in the redacted signal exchange. Russell Weiler, of course, is indeed 12 characters. Now, obviously, William McClure consists of 14 characters, and Will McClure consists of 11 characters. So, while McClure's naming convention is close to Katz's derived characters, it is not exactly spot on. I personally believe that this 12-character count likely has an error of plus or minus 2 characters. And since numerous Air Force biographies display middle names, such as William E. McClure, there is some wiggle room here. But after all, on LinkedIn, McClure goes by Bill McClure. And Bill E. McClure does indeed have 12 characters, so maybe after all, this condition is still satisfied. Now let us zoom back out to the overview of the Department of the Air Force and narrow in on one more absolutely crucial component within the headquarters of the Air Force. Within the air staff under compliance, I would like to narrow in on AFTE, or the Office of the Director of Test and Evaluation for the Air Force. Now, AFTE is indeed different than SAF-AQR, or again, the Science, Technology, and Engineering Directorate under the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Though the Director of Air Force Test and Evaluation does work closely and in cooperation with the SAF-AQ. By studying Headquarters Air Force Mission Directive 1-52 dated 20 April 2021, we can learn the Director of Air Force Test and Evaluation, or T&E, serves as the senior test executive for both the Air Force and Space Force. AFTE functions as, quote, the chief T&E advisor to the DAF senior leadership, developing T&E policy and establishing T&E guidance, advocating for test resources to support weapons system development, and resolving developmental and operational test programmatic issues, end quote. Basically, AFTE is the tip of the spear for all Air Force test and evaluation programs. AFTE provides guidance, direction, and oversight for all matters pertaining to the formulation, review, and execution of T&E plans, policies, programs, and budgets. And of course, I will make the argument such T&E programs under AFTE include the reverse engineering and derivation of non-human technologies. Indeed, let's already circle back to some of my work and most prominent hypotheses. AFTE possesses, quote, authority relating to the management and operation of specific DoD T&E activities, as delegated to the SecAF pursuant to the Department of Defense Directive 3200.11, Major Range and Test Facility Base, end quote. If you have watched even a single one of my videos in the past year, one of my most common talking points revolves around Major Range and Test Facility Bases, or MRTFBs, and how I believe these 23 defense quote-unquote critical cores are paramount to UFO legacy program operations. 23 such MRTFBs exist across the continental United States: 8 Army, 6 Navy, 7 Air Force, and 2 Defense Agency. These 7 Air Force MRTFBs include the 412th Test Wing at Edwards Air Force Base, California, the Nevada Test and Training Range near Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, the Utah Test and Training Range at Hill Air Force Base / Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. Air Force MRTFBs on the Western Range alone comprise over 5 million acres of land. The Utah Test and Training Range here, which is also referred to as the UTTR or UTTR, which shares Dugway Proving Ground with Army MRTFB, the West Desert Test Center or WDTC, has been a major subject of my channel. In my investigation into Dugway Proving Ground, I discussed the testimony of witness MS, who as a contractor at Dugway claimed to stumble upon an intriguing disc housed in a hangar seemingly undergoing dismantling.
Yeah, there was nothing on it, not a seam, not anything, almost like it was like just casted. Yeah, like if you said it 3D printed, but yeah, it's flawless is what I can say. It's stuff that you, like nowadays, there's no way to replicate it for us. I don't know if they were going to get ready to move it or whatever, but they had it broke down. A lot of it was broke down. That bottom section was opened, where you could kind of see into that component area.
This encounter illustrated by MS occurred at Dugway's Avery area, which touches on Michael Army Airfield, an airstrip at Dugway utilized by UTTR and the 388th Range Squadron out of nearby Hill Air Force Base. And Hill Air Force Base, of course, is the primary airfield under the UTTR, or again Utah Test and Training Range. Interesting then that the alleged deep underground military base on Dugway, specifically the West Desert Test Center's Granite Peak, is swarmed by the 388th Range Squadron radars and stations. Additionally, the NTTR. I have discussed the NTTR at length in the former Nevada test site, now Nevada National Security Site, that is housed within the NTTR. Much of this was discussed in my project on Sandia National Labs, but I also spoke of NTTR in my NRO project, when I discussed a source of mine that claimed to operate within an NRO-led UFO crash retrieval team based out of the NTTR during the 2000s. Nevada Test and Training Range also exists within the testimony of the aforementioned Ed. Recall how Ed, a retired Air Force officer, stated he operated within a derivative technologies or alien reproduction vehicle program that was housed within the Edwards 412th Test Wing MRTFB that operated across Edwards, the NTTR, and other installations on the quote-unquote Western Ranges. Indeed, this makes perfectly logical sense to me, as within NTTR exists 2 facilities infamous in UFO lore that I have actually spent a significant amount of time connecting to UFO legacy programs. The ever-famous Area 51, actually occupied by the Edwards 412 Test Wing, and the DOE's premier classified weapons testing range, the Tonopah Test Range, managed by Sandia National Labs and also occupied by the Edwards 412 Test Wing. So why do I believe AFTE, that operates as an authority relating to specific test and evaluation programs and concepts across Air Force major range and test facility bases, deals with UFO legacy programs? And based upon the MRTFBs I have covered in my own research, specifically dealing with reverse engineering and exploitation of non-human craft. Well, for one here, I have held Ed's military records and papers within my own hands and read them with my own eyes. Whilst involved with the Edwards 412, where Ed literally states he served a critical role within a T&E program for reverse engineered vehicles, Ed's OPR, or again, Office of Primary Responsibility here, was AFTE. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this Edwards time to quickly discuss an individual I strongly believe did indeed serve to gatekeep UFO legacy program operations from official channels, and may have even operated within the programs on a T&E level themselves. Major General Don M. Dunlop served as the Director, Operational Capability Requirements, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements within the headquarters of the Air Force. From 2018 to 2019, Dunlop served as the Director of the Special Access Program Central Office, aka the Director of SAPCO. For a reference here, think back to the Wilson Davis notes. These notes are disputed to this day, yet I maintain the fundamental facts of the document regarding Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson being stonewalled in accessing UFO legacy programs are absolutely true. Within the notes, VADM Wilson received actionable intelligence from then Director of SAPCO, Air Force General H. Marshall Ward, regarding UFO legacy program records housed within the OWSTAT, now USD-ANS. I do not think it is unreasonable to think the Director of SAPCO to this day, under the Office of the Secretary of Defense, serves a gatekeeping role to UFO legacy programs, and possibly, as we discussed earlier, subordinate to the Director of the NPMS. Perhaps then it is also interesting that from 2009 to 2012, Dunlop served as Vice Commander and Commander of the Edwards 412 Test Wing. Oh, and yeah, Ed has literally received letters of commendation signed by Dunlop during his time in Legacy at the 412th. So admin, if you are listening, please subpoena Dunlop. And all of this goes deeper, and again pairs with our themes today of departments hidden within departments. Two three-letter organizations share responsibility within AFTE, AFTEP, Policy, Programs, and Resources Division, and AFTEZ, the Special Programs Division. As you might expect, AFTEZ Special Programs Division represents Air Force T&E to the Special Programs Review Group, overseeing all Air Force special access programs surrounding test and evaluation. AFTEZ also deals heavily with foreign material programs. For example, according to the Headquarters Air Force Mission Directive 1-52, AFTEZ is responsible for, quote, providing leadership, direction, policy, and resources to ensure DAF, foreign material, and classified test programs meet documented warfighter requirements, end quotes. And another quote, providing management and oversight of the life cycle process for foreign material acquisition and oversight of exploitation of foreign aerospace-related weapon systems and components, end quote. And finally, another quote regarding AFTEZ, quote, directing foreign material program execution to satisfy needs of operations, acquisitions, T&E, and scientific and technical intelligence communities in support of warfighter requirements, end quote. And there are so many more intriguing quotes I could say regarding AFTEZ. Like everything in this subject, perhaps foreign material programs literally refers to UFOs, or perhaps we have to choose to dig deeper, and I choose to dig. Policy, Programs, and Resources Division, AFTEP, under Air Force Test and Evaluation, acts as the T&E policy focal point for all Air and Space Force testing conducted by the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, AFOTEC, the Air Force Major Command's MAJCOMS, Space Force Field Commands, and Forward Operating Agencies. We of course will get to MAJCOMS, but what about AFOTEC? The Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, quote, is a direct reporting unit under U.S. Air Force Headquarters, the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. It is the Air Force independent test agency responsible for testing, under operationally realistic conditions, new systems being developed for Air Force and multi-service use, end quote.
Since its inception in January 1974, the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center has been at the forefront of operational test and evaluation, playing a pivotal role in strengthening national defense and ensuring the Air Force is best equipped to accomplish its mission. AFOTEC's mission is both clear and compelling: to test emerging capabilities in operationally relevant environments, to provide critical data to both warfighters and national decision-makers. Our unwavering commitment is to our primary customer, America's warfighter. AFOTEC is dedicated to eliminating operational surprises, ensuring that when a weapon system is deployed in combat, it performs as expected. As independent evaluators and operational testers, our guiding question is, will it work in a contested environment? Our responsibility is to thoroughly assess weapon systems operationally, identifying both their strengths and weaknesses.
AFOTEC is supposed to operate independently to maintain objectivity in operational training. But as is the case with quote-unquote independent, federally funded and research and development centers, there is no such thing as independence when dealing with waived, unacknowledged special access programs. AFOTEC is located at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. Kirtland, of course, also houses Sandia National Labs, a DOE/NNSA National Lab FFRDC. I have devoted 3+ hours to investigating. AFOTEC operates 4 major detachments outside of Sandia, located at Eglin Air Force Base, Hill Air Force Base in the UTTR, Edwards Air Force Base housing the 412th Test Wing, and Nellis Air Force Base within the NTTR. Seem familiar? AFOTEC test teams conduct tests at these selected sites and collect, analyze, and evaluate the data, as well as prepare formal reports. I strongly theorize elements of AFOTEC likely support AFT&E operations on major range and test facility bases that deal with T&E of technologies of unknown origin and reverse-engineered airframes. Zooming out here, we have begun our analysis of UFO legacy program structure within the Air Force by analyzing the headquarters of the Air Force that operates in direct support to the Secretary of the Air Force. To summarize these past 3 sections, I confidently state that UFO legacy programs, at least the majority of the programs, do not operate without oversight. In fact, again, I theorize these programs operate within extremely strict yet stripped oversight channels, reading in only directorates and compartments critical to operating legacy program missions. These being the retrieval, storage, exploitation, derivation, and test and evaluation of non-human technologies. This is why I thought it so pertinent to analyze the top-level structure of the Air Force to determine who and what offices would likely have access and involvement in these programs. And again, in summary, within the HAF, we investigated the SAF-AQ, aka the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and 3 specific directorates and 1 component under SAF-AQ. SAF-AQR, aka Science, Technology, and Engineering, SAF-AQX, aka Acquisition Integration, SAF-AQL, aka Air Force Special Programs, and the RCO, or Rapid Capabilities Office. All 3 of these directorates under SAF-AQ deal with the deepest of deep and clandestine special access programs. And as I outlined earlier, I believe acquisition legacy program execution is conducted through the RCO to operate as efficiently and securely as possible with near limitless access to funds. In short, I believe high-level acquisition compartments or directorates within not just the Air Force, but the entire DoD/IC are where we must turn our magnifying glass to uncover legacy programs. We additionally investigated the Administrative Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, specifically SAF-AAH or Sensitive Activities, and SAF-AAZ, Security/Special Programs Oversight/Info Protection, and even explored how Director of Sensitive Activities, SES-2 Russell E. Weiler, or Director, Security Special Programs Oversight and Info Protection, SES-2 William E. McClure, may have been the SES-2 Air Force gatekeeper infamously labeled in the Christopher Mellon Signal Exchange. Lastly, we discussed AFTE, or Test and Evaluation, under the Air Staff within the HAF. Here we discussed actual components of Air Force T&E, AFTEP, Policy Programs and Resources Division, and AFTEZ, Special Programs Division. We connected AFTE as a whole to foreign material programs where one may infer foreign materials, including materials of non-human origin. However, as we discussed, I find even more value in AFTE's management of specific T&E activities across Air Force major range and test facility bases. We ultimately linked this AFTE responsibility to AFOTEC and numerous Air Force MRTFBs I have covered before on this channel, and these include the NTTR, UTTR, and Edwards 412 Test Wing. So again, in summary, SAF-AQ, AFT&E, and SAF-AA, including AFAAH and AFAAZ, are where I would recommend the current administration should search to find Air Force legacy programs that operate under the National Security Council.
The United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations, defending the nation, serving justice, protecting the integrity of the Air Force, finding the truth. The men and women of Air Force OSI are reaching a new level of sophistication. We are a federal law enforcement agency that identifies, exploits, and neutralizes criminal, terrorist, and intelligence threats to the Air Force, Department of Defense, and the United States government. Our breadth of mission is vast, from criminal investigations to counterintelligence. Our special agents are on the front line at home and around the globe.
Before we continue down the structure of the Air Force pyramid, I do think it imperative to stop and investigate the ever-infamous Air Force Office of Special Investigations, often referred to as AFOSI or OSI. After all, we outlined numerous offices within the headquarters of the Air Force that I theorize engage with the UFO legacy portfolio. Sure, we have SAPs and USAPs waived and bigoted to keep legacy operations both highly secret and compartmentalized, but also free from congressional oversight. And we have the SAPCO, or Special Access Program Central Office, and its former director, Don Dunlop, who also served within the Edwards 412 Test Wing as commander. And we have the director of the NPMS, one of the most critical, little-known positions in the entire country to arbitrate access to such programs. A fine security structure, sure, but what about active program protection, insider and outsider threat mitigation, and enforcement of strict secrecy surrounding Air Force UFO USAPs? When I say AFOSI, what comes to mind? Is it AFOSI silencing numerous witnesses in the days of Project Blue Book? Or perhaps you think of OSI counterintelligence special agent Rick Doty, who was stationed out of Kirtland Air Force Base and infamously engaged in psychological operations against one Paul Benowitz. I always find it intriguing Doty now has seemingly turned a new leaf and is aligned with various disclosure initiatives, yet still finds himself in hot waters. Recently, Doty actually claimed there were attempts for him and Luis Elizondo to work together in a counterintelligence position.
I was offered a job in 2019 by the United States Space Force, where Lou Elizondo worked, to work with him in disinformation. And I said, not no, but hell no, I'll never do that again.
Ultimately, I am intrigued by Doty's alleged new open kimono true testimony. especially the hour-and-a-half interview he conducted with Stephen Greer for the documentary Unacknowledged.
And during my time there, my first few months there, I was briefed into a special access program involving the U.S. government's investigation and contacts with extraterrestrial, the visitation of these extraterrestrials to Earth, and the Air Force's involvement with these extraterrestrials.
What year did you first get read into the project?
I was read into the project in the summer of 1979. And the briefing was, it was a special access program. You have a special security clearance to have access to it. And it was I was briefed into it by an Air Force colonel from Washington who came down and briefed myself and a couple other people into this program.
And do you remember that code name, the project code number?
Yeah, it was the initial, how do I say this? Because there's still some classifications involved in this, I think. So it was, the code name that I was briefed into it was Yankee Black. But that was the program's briefing. It wasn't necessarily the UFOs program. It was just how it was a security code for an access program. Yankee White was access to the White House, and Yankee Black was the access that you would have to get into this program or right into the program.
Take what we just heard here, for example, Yankee Black as an access code into UFO programs. This interview was filmed between 2017 and 2019, and many years later, the Washington Post published a nonsensical and dubious article claiming any and all UFO whistleblowers had been tricked by an Air Force Special Access program meant to haze officers called Yankee Blue. If Yankee Blue is so real and a fake sap, then there should be no trouble releasing the document, right? I mean, even people who have called themselves journalists claim to have this document, a document secured by special access controls. So if they can have it, why can't we? Ultimately, Doty has spoken about much of what we have talked here on my channel. However, due to his past counterintelligence efforts, I will not be taking into consideration Doty's testimonies. If anything, I lead towards Doty performing program protection by proclaiming truths mixed in with misdirection, lies, and red herrings, aka classic disinformation techniques. But perhaps one day we will analyze Doty and his claims and how they have progressed, changed, and stayed the same over the years. But let's take a step back and talk about AFOSI a little more, and discuss why I'm including the Department of the Air Force's primary federal law enforcement agency that has a proven history of meddling within UFOs and UFO sightings within this project. The OSI, quote, provides professional investigative service to commanders of all Air Force activities. OSI identifies, investigates, and neutralizes criminal, terrorist, and espionage threats to Air Force and Department of Defense personnel and resources. The command focuses on 5 priorities. Develop and retain a force capable of meeting Air Force needs. Detect and provide early warnings of worldwide threats to the Air Force. Identify and resolve crimes that threatens Air Force readiness or good order and discipline. Combat threats to information systems and technologies. Detect and defeat fraud impacting force acquisitions and base-level capabilities. Today, AFOSI consists of 2,600 plus active duty, reserve, and civilian personnel, around 2,000 of which are federally credentialed special agents. AFOSI has 8 field investigation regions, 7 of which are actually aligned with Air Force Major Commands or MAJCOMS. Reference back to our Air Force structure chart and recall MAJCOMS exist as a significant Air Force organization subordinate to the headquarters of the Air Force. Now, this may perfectly well be coincidence, but just bear with me for a moment. Recall back to earlier in this video in my Sandia project to the testimony of former New Mexico State Rep. J. Andrew Kistner. Kistner would bravely conduct numerous interviews with first-hand legacy program personnel between 1994 and 1995, and actually share his findings with select individuals, such as Congressman Stephen Schiff, who ultimately launched an intriguing investigation into Roswell. Sources would disclose to Kistner that several classified presidential executive orders in July of 1948 would create the early skeleton of legacy programs. These directives would seek custody of recovered disks given to the Atomic Energy Commission and their government-owned, contractor-operated national labs, like Sandia officially established in '49. I'm actually in firm solidarity with this point in particular and presented such findings as an argument for around 3 hours in my Sandia project. Indeed, I am in complete agreement with the overwhelming majority of Kistner's disclosures, as I have come to understand similar truths. Now, I do differ slightly in understanding President Eisenhower may have been a bit more consequential in establishing the UFO legacy program framework, but Truman indeed did lay such foundations. According to Kistner, early programs saw the National Security Council operate as overall program coordinator with early support from the Naval Research Lab, Vannevar Bush's Research and Development Board, and Air Force Systems Command, a former Air Force Major Command. Seen as according to Kistner, such a framework was established by classified presidential executive order in July of 1948. I do find it intriguing. AFOSI was established in 1948 and fully morphed into an operational agency by August of 1948. Is this a coincidence here? Well, perhaps, but I do find these lineups of dates quite intriguing. Indeed, it was Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg that signed General Order No. 29 on 15 July 1948 that actually empowered OSI to engage in counterintelligence activities. Vandenberg was also an original alleged member of the enigmatic and infamous Majestic 12, another interesting parallel here. And of course, in no way, shape, or form am I claiming AFOSI exists as a program protection and federal enforcement agency behind Air Force UFO programs. No, I am claiming here a specialized office within OSI does this. So as we discussed, AFOSI operates 8 field investigation units, 7 of which are aligned with Air Force Major Commands, and OSI consists of over 230 acknowledged sites worldwide. AFOSI Region 7, the only region not aligned with the MAJCOM, operates with the mission to, quote, provide counterintelligence and security program management for special access programs under the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, end quotes. Indeed here, to kickstart our investigation, AFOSI gets even more specialized in relation to working with sensitive Air Force SAPs. OSI is comprised of several specialized investigation, training, or support units, and these include the Office of Procurement Fraud, Force Support Squadron, Air Force Special Investigations Academy, Investigations, Collections, Operations Nexus Center, and here, the Office of Special Projects, aka PJ. AFOSI PJ is the premier target for our investigation into Air Force UFO legacy program security. The Office of Special Projects, aka PJ, as I will refer to it from here on out, can be labeled as a simple phrase we hear all the time in regards to UFO programs. Quote, PJ, critical to national security, end quote. According to the AFOSI website, quote, PJ's most critical mission is preserving the most classified and site-sensitive technologies. To fulfill that mission, PJ agents are trained and equipped to secure, recover, and protect these technologies, end quote. PJ operates to deliver robust and flexible multidiscipline security and investigative services to special access programs or SAPs. PJ is responsible for performing program security, inspection, cybersecurity, investigative, and counterintelligence functions for all Air and Space Force SAPs. Whether it be security and protection, counterintelligence, oversight, investigation, support, etc., PJ is the critical office that protects and secures critical and classified sensitive Air Force technologies and USAPs. AFOSI has previously been attached to protect top secret R&D of some of the US's most innovative and secretive airframes, and these include Tacit Blue, the B-2 Spirit Bomber, B-21 Raider, and F-117A Nighthawk. Similar to the DARPA Security and Intelligence Directorate, aka DARPA SID, in the DOE's Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, aka OICI, within my UFO Legacy Program framework, serving as a proverbial limestone casing to protect the pyramid from the elements, or in real life, insider and outsider threat protection. I believe with the utmost conviction, Air Force UFO Legacy Program SAPs and USAPs are safeguarded by the men and women within AFOSI PJ. Indeed, let's just take a look at some of the 31 acknowledged AFOSI PJ locations across the continental United States. Special Projects maintains a permanent presence at the Pentagon, Crystal City, Virginia, Hanscom Air Force Base, Massachusetts, Palmdale, California, El Segundo, California, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Las Vegas, Nevada, Hill Air Force Base, Utah, Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico, and the Naval Support Activity Dahlgren. Let's break all of these down, as every single location listed has been directly mentioned in my projects of prior. Crystal City here features 8 of 10 of the US's top defense contractors, and the small neighborhood is where roughly 2/3 of federal contracts are awarded by value. The location holds primary offices held by Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, L3, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and more. All contractors, I am highly confident, engage with UFO programs. The neighborhood of Crystal City also holds or is in close proximity to numerous FFRDCs I believe are up to their eyeballs in UFO programs. And these include the Center for Naval Analyses, Institute for Defense Analyses, Aerospace Corporation, RAND Homeland Security Operations Analysis Center, and more. And additionally, Crystal City is home to myriad DoD research agencies, including DARPA, the Office of Naval Research, and Air Force Office of Scientific Research. As one former SAP security specialist who operated within legacy programs told me, quote, "The answers to everything you are looking for lie in Crystal City," end quote. El Segundo, California serves as a major hub for aerospace and defense, with large institutions focused on top-secret RDT&E, from Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and the Aerospace Corporation. Wright-Patterson is easily the most infamous Air Force base relating to UFO lore, with stories of deep underground military bases, recovered biologics, and stored non-human craft. I, of course, will take a bit of a different approach according to our investigation today and mark out Wright-Patterson as housing Major Command Air Force Materiel Command. I believe AFMC here holds many of the keys for us to analyze UFO reverse engineering and material exploitation programs, and of course, stay tuned for that. Las Vegas, Nevada, of course, borders the NTTR MRTFB, housing Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51 adjacent sites like the enigmatic S4, Tonopah Test Range, Area 6, etc. Again, most top-secret sites across the NTTR are occupied by the Edwards 412th Test Wing. In my opinion, of course, the most critical wing and MRTFB in all of Air Force legacy programs. In a similar manner, Hill Air Force Base resides in the Utah Test and Training Range and Dugway Proving Ground, aka Area 52. Hill Air Force Base itself is home to Air Force Materiel Command's Ogden Air Logistics Complex, which is the worldwide manager for a wide range of aircraft, engines, missiles, software, avionics, and accessories components. I believe Hill Air Force Base likely engages in joint Air Force and Army UFO legacy program operations across Dugway Proving Ground, housed within the UTTR and WDTC, or West Desert Test Center. Kirtland Air Force Base is home to the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, AFOTEC, which, as we discussed earlier, works closely with the half-compartment Air Force Test and Evaluation. Kirtland also shares a home with Sandia National Labs. Again, Sandia is, alongside MITRE, the most critical FFRDC to UFO legacy program operations in my opinion. NSF Dahlgren, or Naval Support Facility Dahlgren, is an interesting one here. Why would AFOSI PJ be at a naval support facility? Dahlgren is home to a Naval Surface Warfare Center, or NSWC. I believe that NSWC Dahlgren, alongside NSWC Crane, which infamously allegedly houses the Off-World Technologies Division, alongside the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, or NUIC, Keyport, are all critical pillars in naval UFO retrieval and reverse engineering missions. Indeed, I believe these naval facilities are all critical to the tip of the spear, Pax River. Apparently, AFOSI PJ operates critical space surveillance and tracking missions outside of Dahlgren here. And lastly, Palmdale, California. Palmdale resides within the Antelope Valley. I have extensively provided theories that Antelope Valley, sometimes referred to as the Aerospace Valley, is the backbone of UFO RDT&E programs, providing test ranges, infrastructure, scientists, contractors, FFRDCs, personnel, Air Force wings, etc., towards the RDT&E of alien reproduction vehicles and derivative technologies. I have also published on Antelope Valley here, housing access to a complex network of deep underground military bases. I have theorized this network operates largely under Edwards Air Force Base in China Lake, and connects to Lockheed's infamous Helendale Radar Cross-Section Range and Northrop's infamous Tahone Radar Cross-Section Range. Antelope Valley is so incredibly interesting and connects to so much of my work. I highly recommend checking out my projects on Lockheed Martin or DUMS to learn more. Antelope Valley and the former Norton Air Force Base even connects to one of my all-time favorite ARV cases, the 1988 Norton Air Force Base Air Show Flux Liners. Most pertinent to today is likely Palmdale's proximity to Edwards Air Force Base, where Ed states the Edwards 412 Test Wing under the Air Force Test Center AFTC, itself under MAJCOM Air Force Materiel Command AFMC, tests and evaluates aerospace vehicles derived from technical vehicles operated by non-human intelligence. Palmdale is also crucial because of Air Force Plant 42. Plant 42 is one of 4 Air Force plants situated throughout the United States and managed by the Acquisition Environment and Industrial Facilities Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Plant 42 is known as a GOCO institution, government-owned, contractor-operated. This is an ideal management structure as we've observed with FFRDCs, one of the critical layers of my UFO legacy program pyramid, that I say serves as the missing link between US DoD/IC elements and defense industrial base prime contractors. Plant 42 provides exclusive access to a unique government-operated airfield complex to but just 3 defense contractors. And I bet you can guess who these are. Yeah, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. Indeed, on this GOCO complex, these 3 contractors work closely with pilots from the Edwards Air Force Test Center's premier test pilot school. Again, think back to the claims of Ed, who claimed pilots of ARV hail from the prestigious TPS here. Such a sentiment was shared by Air Force Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché, who disclosed his knowledge of the TR-3B alien reproduction vehicle.
My name is Edgar Rochelle Fouché. I'm here to speak about secret government technology, reverse engineering of alien artifacts. The circular plasma field accelerator ring, called the magnetic field disruptor, surrounds a rotatable crew compartment. It's far ahead of anything you've ever imagined as far as technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed a reverse engineered MFD, and I believe the government will go at any lengths to protect this technology.
Fouché would state the then Northrop Corporation, Lockheed Corporation, and Boeing were critical defense contractors involved with R&D of the TR-3B, and pilots of TR-3B hailed from both the Naval Test Pilot School at Pax River and the Air Force Flight Test Center AFFTC, which would become the AFTC's Test Pilot School out of Edwards. Fouché would also state many TR-3B were flown or operated out of Edwards itself.
One night, a longtime friend of mine and I were standing on top of the Fairchild A-10 hangar at Edwards Air Force Base. It was 2 a.m. and a perfectly clear night with millions of stars visible to the naked eye. This was a very common night at Edwards. I noticed a group of stars we were looking at seemed to be shifting in color. And at the time, I could name quite a few constellations. I'd just taken an astrology course and definitely knew what the Big Dipper was. I made a C in it. I made a C in that course, I think, or B. So I pointed out to my friend that the 3 stars near the Big Dipper in triangular formation were not supposed to be there. We watched as the strobing stars shifted in color from a reddish yellow, from a bright blue to a reddish yellow. After a period of about 20 minutes, we could tell that the objects weren't stars because they were getting larger. This was somewhat unnerving. It was further unnerving when the space in between the stars started blocking out the stars in the background. We decided it probably was a top secret Air Force vehicle of some type. Still, we weren't sure. At the time, I didn't believe in UFOs. And that's the honest truth.
Many criticize Fouché for his lack of evidence, and I get it here. However, it is statements like these regarding the R&D, management agencies, and involved contractors of TR-3B that give me pause to reflect on Fouché's claims regarding this triangular airframe with reverse-engineered propulsion systems from Sandia and Lawrence Livermore. Seen as Plant 42 is not only home to Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman, but also their Lockheed Skunk Works, Boeing Phantom Works, and Northrop's Advanced Technology Development Center, which are these contractors' most secretive compartments that deal with top-secret aircraft, special access programs, and carve-out contracts. It makes complete sense that AFOSI PJ would have a permanent station here, especially if, like I theorize and am confident in, Palmdale is critical to U.S. UFO Legacy Program RDT&E infrastructure. Without exaggeration, throughout this video so far, I have made myriad mentions to a possible UFO Legacy Program gatekeeper that I do indeed fear. I consider it a risk speaking about this individual, but alas, we must be the change we want to see in this topic. This alleged gatekeeper and an individual I would consider to be a boogeyman. Well, this would be one Mr. Terry Phillips, former executive director of OSI, Office of Special Projects, aka AFOSI PJ. Mr. Phillips enjoyed a remarkable career within federal service and enjoys an equally prestigious career within industry today. Terry Phillips began his career as an Air Force officer. Around 1997, Phillips became a special agent for the OSI, and by 2001 operated as Program Security Officer / Special Agent for AFOSI PJ. At this position, with Air Combat Command MAJCOM HQ, Phillips, quote, protected special access programs for the Combat Air Force, end quote. By just 2006, Phillips achieved the position of Deputy Director within AFOSI, directing counterintelligence and investigative operations supporting Air Force Mobility Command, which is a MAJCOM. Phillips would eventually transition to Director of Counterintelligence within AFOSI from 2012 to 2015, where by 2016, Phillips operated as Deputy Director for specifically AFOSI PJ. And here is where things get really interesting. From December 2016 to December of 2021, Phillips served as the outright Air Force SAP Security Director. Within this role, Phillips led investigative and counterintelligence strategy and operations to protect Air Force and Space Force SAPs. Within this role, Phillips also served as Executive Director of AFOSI Special Projects, PJ. And it is worth noting in these two roles as Executive Director, Office of Special Projects PJ, and United States Air Force and Space Force Special Access Program Security Director, Phillips was not only responsible for all Air Force and Space Force SAPs, but also all non-Air Force SAPs where the Air Force had been assigned responsibility. On 6 August 2020, Phillips was selected for Senior Executive Service Tier 1, the equivalent to a Brigadier General or 1-star Admiral. Phillips was the first Executive Director of PJ to hold the rank of SES-1. Indeed, according to an extremely obscure podcast featuring Phillips titled, quote, OSI Today, My OSI Journey 16, end quote, Phillips was incredibly proud, specifically of his tech protection capabilities as SES-1.
Now, you were asked about, at the time, your reaction to the news of being elevated to the SES as the executive director, and the first word out of your mouth, sir, was pride. the one word pride, and you said you were proud that this appointment elevates all of OSI and recognizes the value of our technology protection mission. And I would assume that since the time you were appointed, that pride has not waned one bit.
Wayne, it's my pride has grown 25-fold. It's absolutely amazing to see the mission that we do in OSI. And for me, getting to be involved with our special projects mission every day it's just very special to be able to see that accomplished in the field at the very edge of our Air Force operations. It's amazing.
I think back to David Grush's sworn testimony before Congress in the summer of 2023. Like most of what Grush says, if we listen, perhaps there are some clues here we can detect.
So who gets to decide this, in your opinion, in the past?
It's a group of career senior executive officials.
Okay, are they government officials?
Both in and out.
Do what?
Both in and out of government, and that's about as far as I can go there. Yeah.
All right, well, that leads to my next question.
As I said earlier with RCO, senior executive officials is more of a generic term comprising agency heads, cabinet secretaries, deputy secretaries, senior executive service, etc. And let me just say this here. I strongly suspect the reprisals, academic terrorism, and threats to his career and safety David Grush experienced before submitting his whistleblower complaints to Thomas Mannheim under the Intelligence Community Inspector General, as well as reprisals leveraged at other heroic whistleblowers like Dylan Borland, partially, if not fully, came from offices like the DARPA SID, Security and Intelligence Directorate, and AFOSI PJ. Grush here would have indeed been considered an insider or outsider threat by such SAP security directors. Seen as David Grush embarked on a quest to uncover UFO legacy programs hidden beneath the deepest layers of bigoted waived USAPs in the US black budget. I reckon if and when Grush stumbled upon the US Air Force Legacy Program portfolio, or Air Force's involvement in UFO legacy programs hidden within offices like AFTE, SAF AAH, and SAF AQ, involving MAJCOMS like AFMC and its AFRL and AFTC, Air Force MRTFBs such as the 412th Test Wing, NTTR and UTTR, the Executive Director of AFOSI PJ and Air Force SAP Security Director Terry Phillips would have swarmed to attempt to stop David Grush, and perhaps, just perhaps, launched numerous reprisals against this American hero. Perhaps Phillips and AFOSI PJ leveraged reprisals at other whistleblowers or prospective whistleblowers and had some help. I know of several non-public UFO legacy program first-handers who faced harassment from specifically the FBI between 2021 and today. One such individual worked directly within UFO RDT&E under the US Air Force. Indeed, quite recently in December of 2025, Jeff Nusatelli went on that UFO podcast and discussed elements of the FBI attempting to infiltrate UFO podcast circles.
The Fed has actively infiltrated the podcasting space. I put this out publicly a few months ago. Kurt Jai-Mungal, who I'm a fan of, put a tweet out a few months ago and said, "Hey, what's going on in UFO world?" And I said, here's what's going on. The FBI is infiltrating the podcast space. And you're going to see that start to play out. And I think that is going to play out. And you're going to, because of that initiative and other initiatives, you're going to see heroes fall.
The FBI possibly targeting whistleblowers or taking a vested interest in UFO podcasts may seem bizarre, but I think there is a very clear connection here. In late 1979, according to OSI's own website, PJ introduced an innovative new approach to help protect, quote, acknowledged black programs, end quote. This innovative technique was to insert a small cadre of FBI personnel into the Air Force's Special Access Program efforts. AFOSI PJ and the FBI developed the Guardian Angel program to include small groups of FBI personnel assigned to Air Force Special Access programs. Approximately 8 FBI agents in Los Angeles and select personnel at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. were briefed into many of the most critical Air Force SAPs. While of course, Guardian Angel under AFOSI, PJ, and FBI absolutely protected many conventional SAPs here, like arresting Thomas Patrick Cavanaugh, a Northrop B-2 engineer who attempted to sell classified stealth technology. I do find it very intriguing Guardian Angel would be located near the two most critical areas in the entire continental United States, in my opinion, for UFO programs. So with this, the question must be asked. These non-public legacy first-handers I have spoken about who have claimed to have been harassed by the FBI. Was this FBI element attached to AFOSI PJ under the Guardian Angel or a similar continuation program? In fact, I believe it is well worth the current administration's time to investigate if PJ is actively operating against whistleblowers. SES-1, Air Force SAP Security Director and Executive Director of OSI Office of Special Projects Terry Phillips. I hope you didn't think we'd stop there. Referencing back to the OSI Today podcast Phillips appeared on shortly before his retirement, Phillips took pride in accomplishing the art of the impossible during his tenure at OSI.
Now, at the top of the broadcast, we mentioned that this is the eve of your retirement from OSI. And in your farewell email earlier today to the PJ team, you said something very interesting, and I was hoping you can maybe elaborate on that just a bit. You said, quote, "We define the art of the possible." What exactly did you mean by that, sir?
Great. I'm glad you picked up on that. A security organization is known for saying to say no. Uh-huh. And I've been in PJ I joined PJ back in 2001 for a short stint, and it's very, very easy to say no to industry, to government, to a pilot who's flying. The art of the possible is not to say no, but to say you can do it if we add this mitigation. Uh-huh. Can we build a classified airplane in a hangar? Mm-hmm. The answer is it doesn't have sound attenuation. It doesn't. There's some exposure. There may be some emissions about this. Right. How do we protect all the entry points? Well, so it's easy to just say no. You can't build it in a hangar. Well, where are you going to build? Where are you going to build an airplane? Sure. So you have to say yes. Is you can do that, but we need to add some blinds on the windows. We need to add some insulation for sound attenuation. That is the art of the possible. Mm-hmm. Now, and then it becomes a discussion. So the art of the possible is a discussion that tells you how to get to yes. And in PJ, we're known for that. We're the security organization that is known for doing that. We understand the risk, we understand the threats, and we understand what the Air Force has for funding and availability and time to be able to develop a platform. And then we enter a risk discussion with the program executive officer or the program manager on how to get to yes. And so that is the art of the possible.
Immediately upon his retirement from PJ, Terry Phillips was appointed as the Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Leidos. Quote, Terry has managed some of the Department of Defense's most sensitive capabilities, technologies, and operations, and we're thrilled to welcome him to Leidos. His decades of experience will be instrumental as we look to bolster our corporate global security strategy, end quote. Leidos, an American defense, aviation, information technology, and biomedical research company, is currently known as the defense industry's largest IT services provider, with exclusive, extensive contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense and Intelligence community. If Leidos sounds familiar to you, well, this is because in 2013, Leidos spun out of parent company Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC. And in 2016, Leidos merged with Lockheed Martin's IT sector. SAIC has featured as a target for my investigations. SAIC here, aka NSA West, has shown an incredibly fascinating trail of black budget monies, exotic projects, work on psychic phenomena, and also served as a home for myriad gatekeepers. And in my opinion, SAIC operates the Off-World Technologies Division housed under the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane. I highly recommend watching my SAIC project, but one of the primary pieces of that investigation was addressing individuals I believed served high-level positions within UFO legacy programs whilst in the DoD/IC, who then went on to trade in their stars and stripes for a suit at SAIC. What I mean to say is I believe these individuals exited federal service to continue work on UFO legacy programs on the contractor side. Such SAIC individuals include Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, the Honorable John M. Deutsch, Admiral William F. Rayborn, Donald Kerr, and more. Oh yeah, and if we're adhering to today's investigation, that the SAF-AQ, aka the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and SAF-AQ's directorates, SAF-AQL, SAF-AQX, and SAF-AQR, are instrumental to UFO legacy program operations. Remember that former SAF-AQ head, Lawrence J. Delaney, served as Deputy Sector Manager for Military Sciences and Information Systems Sector, and then as Manager of its Information System Group for SAIC. I say all this because I believe Terry Phillips engaged in a similar shift from Executive Director of PJ and Air Force SAP Security Director onto Leidos. But Leidos, in my opinion, is just a drop in the pond to what came next for Phillips. From 2013 to present, Phillips has served as Vice President for Security and Chief Security Officer for none other than Northrop Grumman.
Building aircraft, the likes of which the world has never seen. This is what we do. That's the value of performance. Northrop Grumman.
Northrop needs no introduction here, and now is when I encourage folks to pay attention to what I say regarding the select few in defense industrial base primes or defense contractors read into UFO legacy program operations. I believe most personnel within contractors are subject to extreme compartmentalization and are not privy to what they are working on or possess just a tiny piece of the knowledge pie. A good conceptual example here is Bob Lazar claiming program scientists and technicians under EG&G at Area 51S4 could not communicate cross compartments. In Bob's words, Bob allegedly worked on the reactor and propulsion system, but had zero ability to contact teams studying metallurgy, chemistry concepts, etc. So, who do I say is read into the programs at a corporate level? And again, I strongly recommend you listen to me here. This would include SAP security directors and corporate directors for special programs, like none other than Mr. Terry Phillips of Northrop Grumman. Before we move on though, I have detailed a thesis that Terry Phillips is a boogeyman of UFO legacy program gatekeepers, illustrating that in his SES-1 position within AFOSI PJ and Air Force SAPs, Phillips likely engaged in aggressive legacy program protection, as well as insider and outsider threat mitigation, possibly with his FBI chums under the Guardian Angel program. Well, this here is the cherry on top. We actually have verifiable instances of Phillips being connected to UFOs. And let's go ahead and thank FOIA ace John Greenwald for this one. On 15 July 2025, Greenwald published an article on the Black Vault titled, quote, "The DoD Inspector General's Evaluation of the DoD's Actions Regarding Unidentified Aerial Phenomena," end quote. Greenwald sought records pertaining to project number D2021-Dev0SN-0116.000, a Department of Defense Office of Inspector General project aimed at evaluating how the DoD has managed reports and investigations relating to UAPs. One name came up numerous times regarding this project in a FOIA response dated 6 February 2025. That name took part in classified conversations during the Inspector General's UAP evaluation, and that name is Terry Phillips. Amongst the endless redactions, Phillips is all over these documents, alongside former AFOSI Commander Brigadier General Terry Bullard, as participating in numerous, and I mean numerous, classified UFO conversations with the DoD IG. Indeed, Phillips was even positioned as a subject matter expert on UFOs, with the DoD Deputy Inspector General excitedly sharing redacted nuggets of information given by Phillips in a meeting General Bullard was unable to attend that took place on Thursday, 4 March 2021. Phillips again appeared in a relevant FOIA drop dated 15 July 2025. This time, Phillips as Executive Director of PJ appeared alongside USD ANS and USD INS SAPCO, Air Force Security / Special Programs Oversight / Info Protection, aka SAP AAZ, Army SAPCOs, Director of the Navy Special Programs Division, and more extremely senior positions. Quite intriguing, Phillips would be considered as a UFO point of contact amongst these extremely high-level DoD positions, is it not? But after all, I think Phillips perfectly fits the bill as a senior UFO POC or point of contact and subject matter expert to the DoD IG. As both in federal service and in his corporate roles, I believe Terry Phillips is a gatekeeper of UFO legacy program operations. I prompt this lining of questioning for the administration to ask Phillips, and I'll just go ahead and quote myself here. Quote, Mr. Phillips, during your tenure as Director of OSI-PJ and Air Force Special Access Program Security Director, did you actively engage in reprisals against UFO whistleblowers? Did you, alongside the PJ cadre, leverage administrative terrorism, loss of pension / benefits, and threats to life and well-being against whistleblowers, end quotes. And real fast before we move on, I would like to publicly call out Phillips' replacement as both PJ Director and Air Force SAP Director. Additionally, a member of SES, meet Special Agent Liam Russ. Not much here regarding Russ, and we've already spent so much time on PJ, but I would implore the administration to leverage the same questions regarding whistleblowers against Lee M. Russ. Now that we have exhaustively analyzed the headquarters of the Air Force and connected specific compartments to UFO legacy programs, as well as studied the Air Force's formidable SAP security structure in AFOSI-PJ, I think it now prudent we recall our Air Force organizational structure pyramid and move below half to the 10 MAJCOMS in existence. Major Commands or MAJCOMS, as we will continue to call them from here on out, serve as major Air Force subdivisions subordinate to the HAF, specializing in management of forces, all to assure Air Force assets are organized, trained, and equipped. MAJCOMS are typically commanded by a 3 to 4-star general, and these organizations are based on functionality and geography. The current Air Force MAJCOMS of today include Air Education and Training Command, Air Force Global Strike Command, Air Force Reserve Command, Air Mobility Command, Pacific Air Forces, United States Air Forces in Europe and Africa, Air Force Special Operations Command, Air Combat Command, and Air Force MATERIEL Command. Thematically, like our entire investigation today, I don't believe every single Air Force MAJCOM is involved with clandestine UFO projects. Indeed, I think only MAJCOMs that have strict expertise in required areas feature subcomponents, personnel, and pieces read onto the bigot list of TUO or Technology of Unknown Origins programs. I personally suspect at least 4 MAJCOMs have involved elements in legacy programs, 2 of which I will only briefly mention, one of which we will spend a few minutes on, and the last of which we will study for the entirety of the remainder of this section. And these 4 include Air Combat Command, Air Mobility Command, Air Force Special Operations Command, and the most critical target in my opinion, Air Force MATERIEL Command. Air Mobility Command, quote, provides global air mobility through airlift and aerial refueling for all of the United States Armed Forces, end quote. I believe it is likely AMC here has transported recovered or downed UFOs via C-130s or C-5 Galaxies in the past. But again, I only wanted to talk about it briefly. In a similar vein, Air Combat Command operates to, quote, support the global implementation of national security strategy. ACC operates fighters, reconnaissance, battle management, and electronic combat aircraft, end quote. As we mentioned earlier, Air Combat Command is stationed out of Langley Air Force Base. Recalling the testimony of Dylan Borland observing a triangular airframe with black metallic flight paint and what seemed to be an electro-optic cloaking system over the NASA hangar at Langley, recall how Borland stated he knew specifically the technology featured on or in the craft was not ours. I think it a reasonable hypothesis Borland observed Air Combat Command testing either an alien reproduction vehicle or a man-made triangular airframe employing a derivative cloaking system, undergoing test flights by elements of Air Combat Command. Indeed, I expanded on this argument quite a bit in my NRO video, so if you want to hear more on that, go listen in. Air Force Special Operations Command, of course, provides Air Force SOF, or Special Forces units, to SOCOM, or Special Operations Command. SOCOM's Joint Component Command, JSOC, or Joint Special Operations Command, has time and time again been labeled as the direct action and boots-on-the-ground military force for UFO crash retrieval operations. JSOC consists of America's Tier 1 units, the greatest special forces units in the entire world. JSOC includes U.S. Army Delta, Navy SEAL Team 6, aka DevGRU, the Army Intelligence Support Activity, aka ISA, the Army Ranger Regimental Reconnaissance Company, aka RRC, and the Air Force's 24th STS, or Special Tactics Squadron. I cannot stress enough the prestige of Tier 1 units and their helicopter transport chauffeurs from the Army, the 160th SOAR, or Special Operations Aviation Regiment, aka the Night Stalkers. Who, by the way, I believe the 160th SOAR 1st Battalion often engages with UFO crash retrievals, especially for troop and possibly craft transport in CH-47s or MH-47 helicopters. JSOC units conduct the most highly classified, sensitive, and dangerous operations of any unit within the entire U.S. military. The Air Force's component of JSOC, the 24th STS, include pararescuemen, combat controllers, special reconnaissance, and tactical air control party personnel. 24th STS personnel are trained to conduct classified and clandestine missions, including direct action, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, hostage rescue, and special reconnaissance. Recently in that project on the NRO I just mentioned, I outlined a comprehensive thesis on select parallel Tier 1 units existing under their own umbrella authority, who operate as the boots-on-ground and direct action component of clandestine teams dedicated to the retrieval of crashed, downed, or found UFOs worldwide. In the interest of time, I won't rehash that argument, but I strongly recommend viewing that video, as I also covered an intriguing anonymous whistleblower testimony of a 24th STS veteran who claimed his troop chief operated within such UFO retrieval teams, and even recovered a bizarre, egg-shaped craft. Finally, and boy am I excited here, we get to the illustrious Air Force MATERIEL Command.
The spirit of technological innovation, ingenuity, and patriotism lives on in Air Force MATERIEL Command as we deliver solutions to America's warfighters. Today, aircraft can complete missions across the globe without a pilot ever leaving U.S. soil. They have built-in systems that can detect a target, abort a mission, and save pilots' lives. Simply put, we changed the nature of war. And behind every platform, innovation, and Air Force vision of the future is an AFMC airman. Which means the only thing AFMC has to deal with is everything. We built the Air Force of today, and we are changing the nature of warfare for tomorrow. From ground to space to human warfighter and everything in between. We impact the entire life cycle of every Air Force system. New ideas born of basic laboratory research, technology development in areas such as artificial intelligence, 3D printing, quantum science, and more. We prototype and experiment. We test and field advanced Air Force systems. We support supply chain and maintenance of both the new and aging aircraft and systems our fellow airmen need to complete their missions. Whether you're talking about 60-year-old B-52 bombers, cutting-edge software, next-generation warfighting capabilities, our nuclear arsenal, or the Air Force uniform of the future. AFMC is where our Air Force comes for solutions. Beans to bullets, roads to commodes, razors to lasers. Our Air Force depends on us to preserve our heritage and modernize for the future. We are a command of innovators, an extreme combination of dreamers and doers. Necessity is the mother of invention, but we also have to look at what the necessities will be decades from now. We've been turning imagination into reality for years. We were there for the creation of the parachute, the computer mouse, and GPS. We push limits on hypersonics. We train astronauts. The cutting-edge base of the future, we're building it.
Air Force Materiel Command, or AFMC, is the Air Force's largest MAJCOM in terms of funding, commanding a budget portfolio of $82.9 billion in the fiscal year of 2025 alone. This budget is divided into several major categories, including AFMC operations and maintenance, unfunded requirement, working capital fund, centralized asset management, contracting, small businesses, and installation and mission support center. Headquartered out of the infamous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, AFMC conducts research, development, test, and evaluation, and provides acquisition management services and logistics support necessary to keep Air Force weapon systems ready for war. And already I wager some buzzwords are standing out from our extensive investigation today, including R&D, test and evaluation, together as RDT&E and acquisition. AFMC's operational mission is, quote, powering the world's greatest Air Force. AFMC develops, delivers, supports, and sustains war-winning capabilities. AFMC delivers war-winning expeditionary capabilities to the warfighter through development and transition of technology, professional acquisition management, exacting test and evaluation, and world-class sustainment of all Air Force weapon systems. From creation to disposal, AFMC provides the workforce and infrastructure necessary to ensure the United States maintains the world's most respected Air Force, end quotes.
The AFMC mission impacts everything the Air Force does. Our mission is to develop, deliver, support, and sustain war-winning capabilities for our warfighters. That means we investigate and develop new technology, make that technology work for the warfighter, buy it, maintain it, and make sure it continues to work through upgrades and maintenance. We do this to make sure our Air Force continues to be the most lethal air, space, and cyber force the world has ever known.
AFMC is split up into several core mission areas and 6 centers. Discovery and development under the Air Force Research Lab out of Wright-Patterson, Ohio. Test and evaluation out of the Air Force Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base, California. Life Cycle Management under the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. Sustainment and Logistics under the Air Force Sustainment Center out of Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma. Installation and Mission Support under the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center out of Joint Base San Antonio, Texas. And finally, Nuclear Systems Management under Air Force Weapons Center out of Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. I want to take an extended visit here into the Air Force Test Center and Air Force Research Lab under AFMC. If you are wondering why I haven't spent too much time on Wright-Patterson as a whole here, Wright-Pat has been a frequent subject of mine in many of my prior videos. These include claims of recovered biologics and recovered technical vehicles being housed under the legendary Air Force Base. As this video is already so long, I don't wish to tread too much on old ground, and since I don't have too much to add regarding Wright-Pat, I don't care to analyze the Air Force Base too much. But the Air Force Test Center, AFTC, formerly known as the Air Force Flight Test Center, AFFTC, out of Edwards Air Force Base under Air Force Materiel Command, is one of the most critical institutions to our entire investigation today. AFTC, quote, conducts developmental and follow-on testing and evaluation of manned and unmanned aircraft and related avionics, flight control, munitions, and weapons systems. It has flight tested every aircraft in the Army Air Forces and the Air Force's inventory since World War II. AFTC also operates the Air Force Test Pilot School, where the Air Force's top pilots, navigators, and engineers learn how to conduct flight tests and generate the data needed to carry out test missions, end quote. And as we've already discussed all day today, who enforces the AFTC out of Edwards Air Force Base? Well, this is of course the Edwards 412th Test Wing MRTFB, which, quote, plans, conducts, analyzes, and reports on all flight and ground testing of aircraft, weapon systems, software, and components, as well as modeling and simulation for the Air Force. There are 3 core components for this mission: flying operations, maintenance, and engineering, end quote. Recall again witness Ed, a retired Air Force officer. Ed claimed whilst within the Air Force Test Center at the Edwards 412th Test Wing at Edwards Air Force Base, Ed literally served firsthand on a T&E program focused on alien reproduction vehicles or derivative technologies. These airframes were both manned and unmanned, and the pilots of these manned reverse-engineered technical vehicles hailed from the Edwards Test Pilot School. Additionally, recall how Ed's work here was conducted under AFTE, or Air Force Test and Evaluation within the HAF, which we discussed at length earlier. What I'm about to say here, I consider crucial, and I implore you to listen, even though you're about to hear a slew of acronyms, and I'm sorry for that, there's just no way around it. I cannot stress how critical the Edwards 412th MRTFB, the AFTC, the TPS, AFT&E, and thus AFMC is to our investigation. I strongly believe, with extreme conviction, UFO legacy programs within the Air Force utilize the AFTC, TPS, and AFRL, which we will touch on soon, under AFMC, to reverse engineer, exploit, and adapt non-human aircraft and aerospace vehicles for human use. This program harnesses MRTFBs like the Edwards 412th Test Wing, UTTR, and NTTR, rolled under what we could call Western Ranges, for test and evaluation work on this program, and sees critical R&D work from Antelope Valley contractors, especially from Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Martin, hailing from Air Force Plant 42. This is my entire thesis of UFO RDT&E out of Antelope Valley I discuss so very much. Even if you discount the entire rest of this project, please understand this thesis. AFMC, Edwards 412th Test Wing, NTTR, UTTR, the Aerospace Valley, AFTC, TPS, and AFMC are the focal point of actual active Air Force legacy program reverse engineering operations. I refer to this program or programs that focus on the T&E of recovered exotic non-human vehicles as the hidden wing. So again, if you discount the entirety of this video, all 3 hours of it, please remember what I've discussed here about this massive T&E project I call the Hidden Wing. I also do want to talk about the Air Force Research Lab here, which operates as, quote, the primary scientific research and development center for the Department of the Air Force. AFRL plays an integral role in leading the discovery, development, and integration of affordable warfighting technologies for our air, space, and cyberspace force, end quote. While we investigate, just remember AFRL and SAF-AQ under the HAF, which we labeled as a critical admin-level position in UFO programs, work extremely closely on science and technology projects. AFRL is split up into 2 types of directorates, technology and functional. Functional directorates provide specialized support, strategic direction, and oversight of operations and business research, development, and innovation functions of AFRL. Technology directorates focus on development and innovation and are separated by technological capabilities. I am personally very intrigued by AFRL's Directed Energy and Space Vehicles Directorates located on Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Recall that Kirtland shares space with Sandia National Labs, which in my opinion is the premier DOE/NNSA, National Lab FFRDC engaged with UFO programs. I am additionally intrigued in the Aerospace Systems AFRL Directorate, housed at none other than Edwards Air Force Base. I have actually talked about AFRL's presence on Haystack Butte at Edwards before, specifically in my dumb video, where I discussed AFRL and Haystack Butte, possibly featuring clandestine underground facilities that exist amongst a larger dumb network within the Antelope Valley. After all, AFRL popped up on many radars after Seoul 2024, when Dr. Eric Davis stated AFRL was where he observed much of the concrete proof of the existence of UFO legacy program operations, and mentioned this again during my interview with Davis.
They finally got to meet with Hal Puthoff, and he briefed them with his set of information. A lot of what he has overlaps mine, but I have a lot of unique information, both in and outside of the era of the 15 years that I worked with Hal. A lot of it came from NIDS, and Hal knew some of that. A lot of it came from AFRL, and then a lot of it came through the OSAP with my interactions with the CIA and other agencies and companies and so forth.
I'm willing to bet that I look at Davis's comments on AFRL here through a bit of a different lens. I believe with confidence, bolstered by several first-hand private witness testimonies, and a plethora of publicly available testimonies that the U.S. Air Force and UFO legacy programs at large have achieved success both with the derivation of non-human aerospace technologies, as well as creating alien reproduction vehicles that may very well closely emulate non-human craft in both appearance and capabilities. I have stated before, and will state again, that I believe Eric Davis lied to my face, as well as the entire Seoul Conference, by stating there has never been any success in adapting non-human technologies for human use, nor have there ever been any successful construction of alien reproduction vehicles.
And that's one of the interesting aspects with the material science aspect is people have talked about the story of alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs, and there are none, there never have been, because we haven't been able to figure out their technology. The physics engineering and the manufacturing technology doesn't exist at this time. We're just barely scratching quantum materials now and how to create programmable quantum materials. And but that was something that came out of this whole thing with respect to some of these aerospace companies that I interfaced with. And that is that they made some very interesting discoveries in the advanced material sciences aspect of the hardware that was recovered. But propulsion and power, no.
I vehemently disagree with Eric Davis here and believe these comments are a form of program protection. Indeed, I then find it quite comical that after making these statements, Davis would appear in the Age of Disclosure, sitting next to Hal Puthoff, who would make statements regarding reverse-engineered vehicles. Again, I believe this is active program protection from Davis. And it stands to reason if most of Davis's concrete information regarding the UFO quote-unquote crash retrieval portfolio originated from the AFRL, that this program protection strategy from Davis may have been mandated by AFRL. So let's talk a little bit more here about AFRL, because like AFMC and Wright-Patterson, AFRL is baked into UFO lore.
I recognized that there were people in government that wanted to engage the public on topics that unfortunately had a stigma, even though they were based in scientific fact. At the time, there was no mechanism for them to do this. Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects. And they have all taken tremendous risks to themselves and their reputations to do something that can benefit the world. They wanted to be a part of something special, to be a part of a company that could not only change the way we see ourselves, but also change the path humanity is on.
I am particularly intrigued with Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy. TTSA has been a focal point of my videos, so I don't really want to spend too much time here. But as I have talked about recently, I believe Tom was targeted with an operation by Luis Elizondo and others within the National Security Council to push for a limited disclosure. Again, I believe this limited disclosure push was modeled after the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies 10-month report while contracting under the OSAP program called Project Forum. Not to beat a dead horse, but I believe this NSC program was undertaken by Luis Elizondo, who even performed authorized disclosures of the Immaculate Constellation USAP to Tom DeLonge in 2017. And if you think that's interesting, go watch my NRO project to learn more. Amongst Elizondo, Chris Mellon, numerous Skunkworks personnel, and possibly agency personnel, Tom was also advised by numerous high-level military personnel. These included Air Force Major General Neil McCasland, who from 2011 to 2013 served as commander for the Air Force Research Lab out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Oh, and by the way, before his station as commander of AFRL, McCasland also served for 3 years as MATERIEL Wing Director for AFRL Space Vehicles Directorate, operated as Vice Commander for the Ogden Air Logistics Center under AFMC out of Hill Air Force Base out of the UTTR or Utah Test and Training Range, and performed much work closely with the National Reconnaissance Office. According to a communication between Tom DeLonge of TTSA and Hillary Clinton campaign manager John Podesta, McCasland would publicly position himself as a quote-unquote skeptic regarding the UFO phenomenon, but behind closed doors was much more open. Quoting DeLonge's communication to Podesta regarding McCasland, quote, "Trust me, the advice has already been happening on how to do all this. He just has to say that out loud, but he is very, very aware. As he was in charge of all the stuff. When Roswell crashed, they shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. General McCasland was in charge of that exact laboratory up to a couple years ago," end quote. Intriguing how allegedly, according to DeLonge, McCasland stated that since the 1947 Roswell incident, critical Air Force Lab elements out of Wright-Patterson had been engaging in the storage, study, and presumably reverse engineering of non-human vehicles. As I always say, TTSA is such a bizarre enigma, and perhaps one day I will sit down for a full investigation. It is interesting that recently TTSA always seems to sneak its way into my videos, isn't it? So McCasland allegedly stated Air Force elements at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base had been in charge of at least some recovered UFO materials, specifically Roswell, since 1947. Well, of course, AFRL did not exist then. AFRL was formed in 1997, and the AFMC didn't exist then either. AFMC was established in 1992 as the amalgamation of the former Air Force Logistics Command, AFLC, and the former Air Force Systems Command, AFSC. So in my opinion, this is where things start to get very, very interesting. For our investigation, I actually find a tremendous amount of value in studying the history of Air Force Materiel Command, its precursor MAJCOMS, and these inactive MAJCOMS connections with UFO crash retrievals and reverse engineering. I believe by performing such an analysis of institutions that comprise the modern-day AFMC, that have deep and shocking connections to UFO legacy program operations, allows us clear insights into AFMC's role into the programs today and greatly strengthens the arguments and explorations we've made so far today towards AFMC. Recall in my Sandia project how I discussed the evolution of DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and how after numerous iterations, the DTRA evolved from the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, which originated from Los Alamos Sea Division at Sandia Base. Well, AFMC's evolution and precursor agencies are far more shocking and even more consequential. As I stated, Air Force Materiel was created in 1992 from the joining of Air Force Logistics Command, AFLC, and Air Force Systems Command, AFSC. Let's start here with the Air Force Logistics Command. Air Force Logistics Command operated from 1961 to 1992 before it joined AFSC to form the AFMC. The mission of AFLC was to, quote, keep the U.S. Air Force's aerospace weapon systems in a constant state of combat readiness and support of the Air Force's weapon systems in the form of procurement, supply, maintenance, and transportation, end quotes. I am less interested in AFLC and more interested in what this MAJCOM was pre-1961. AFLC wasn't just created in 1961, it was the redesignation of the Air Materiel Command, or AMC. And guys, I know there's a lot here, just know that Air Materiel Command is different from the modern-day Air Force Materiel Command. Air Materiel Command was established in 1946 and briefly served as the Air Force's R&D workhorse, managing all research and development, systems acquisition, supply, procurement, and maintenance functions for the fledgling Air Force. In 1951, research and development functions were transferred to the newly created Air Research and Development Command, ARDC, which we will talk about soon. But if McCaslin's words to Tom DeLonge are true, seen as AMC operated out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, it is not only a safe bet, but highly likely Air Materiel Command was the unit at Wright-Patterson given custody of the Roswell wreckage. I personally believe the now-defunct Air Materiel Command was integral, alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in constructing early deep underground military bases, holding clandestine operations and UFO legacy programs across the continental United States. Indeed, I do not think it a stretch to assume AMC laid the groundwork for the connected network of DUMBs I strongly believe exists below the Antelope Valley, Edwards Air Force Base, China Lake, Nevada Test and Training Range, Dugway Proving Ground, and other critical sites. But of course, why do I think this? And if you've seen my video on DUMBs, you may recall my section on subterranean facilities and the Nazi connection. Here I discussed extremely advanced Nazi subterranean sites like the Ohrdruf, Regan worm lager out of Poland, and extensive underground sensitive weapon labs and manufacturing plants operated under Nazi secret weapons project director Hans Kammler. In the project, I discussed Operation Paperclip, the infamous program post-World War II to recruit Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians into US government employment. 2 declassified documents can be discovered dating back to 1947 regarding Operation Paperclip. Featured in the documents are requests for a quote-unquote requirement of 4 German technicians to consult on a planned quote-unquote underground plant program. One man named in these intriguing documents was Xavier Dorsch, the director of the TOT organization in the closing days of World War II. The TOT organization was the Nazis' equivalent to the Navy Seabees, or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but not part of the formal German military structure. The founder of the organization, Fritz Todt, designed the famous German Autobahn highway system. Towards the end of World War II, while in the employment of the Nazis, Dorsch had helped with developing a series of huge underground industrial manufacturing facilities to hide from Allied bombing raids. It is quite possible he also aided on the Regan worm lager and Ohrdruf, 2 extremely advanced Nazi underground locations. These requests for Nazi assistance on this underground plant program for Operation Paperclip, well, of course, and maybe bizarrely, this was done by Air Materiel Command. Before the looming threat of the Cold War and need to hide facilities, capabilities, and sensitive installation underground to hide from the Soviets, what exactly was Air Materiel Command hoping to achieve with this underground plant program? And why did AMC specifically request Dorsch from the TOT organization, who had extensive expertise in hyper-advanced subterranean facility design and construction? Well, in my opinion, AMC partially wished for this underground plant program to appropriate infrastructure to safely hold recovered UFOs, and provide appropriate laboratories and facilities for the study of these craft and their occupants. Seen as many rumors have swirled Hans Kammler himself engaged with proto-Nazi legacy programs which studied recovered non-human technologies, I think it's probably a safe bet Hans Kammler ended up with Xavier Dorsch on this underground plant program out of AMC. Okay, now on to Air Force Systems Command, AFSC, the other half of today's AFMC. Air Force Systems Command was already named as an integral piece to UFO legacy program structure. Recall the testimony of former New Mexico State Rep. J. Andrew Kistner I have brought up several times throughout this video. Again, if you want to learn much more about Kistner's disclosures, I do recommend watching my Sandia project. But Kistner learned that flying non-human discs recovered in New Mexico were given to the Atomic Energy Commission and its national laboratories, under directive of classified presidential executive order in July of 1948. The resulting programs feature the National Security Council as overall program coordinator to study and reverse engineer these recovered craft, and the Naval Research Lab, Research and Development Board, and Air Force Systems Command served as critical support elements to early legacy programs. Air Force Systems Command was established in 1961 with the expressed mission of research and development for new weapon systems. Similar to Air Force Logistics Command, 1961 saw Air Force Systems Command as the newest rebranding of a major command, This being the Air Research and Development Command established in 1950/1951 to take R&D focus as well as Edwards Air Force Base out from under Air Materiel Command. So essentially, even before Air Force Logistics Command and Air Force Systems Command joined to create AFMC in 1992, these two MAJCOMs already had quite a bit of interaction and swapping of components with each other. And again, similar to studying Air Force Logistics Command's roots as Air Materiel Command, I think there is tremendous value in studying Air Force Systems Command's roots as the Air Research and Development Center. Though it took R&D responsibility from Air Materiel Command in 1950/1952, the Air Research and Development Command got its real shot in the arm on 1 April 1952, when the Air R&D Command gained a new subordinate, a former major command by the name of the Air Force Special Weapons Center, AFSWC. The Air Force Special Weapons Center operated from 1949 before it was disestablished in 1976, both as a major command and as a subordinate of Air Research and Development Command, and as a subordinate of the Air Force Systems Command. The Air Force Special Weapons Center Command operated out of Kirtland Air Force Base and specialized in atomic, nuclear, and other unconventional weaponry. Once again, I encourage viewers to recall the 1954 Atomic Energy Agreement gave rise to creative classifications to obfuscate UFO programs, materials, biologics, R&D, etc. under trans-classified foreign nuclear information, foreign intelligence information, specifically modern-day non-contract FII, and special nuclear materials, essentially creative classifications under the DOE and its precursor agencies.
They're basically treating this as nuclear secrets because it gives off nuclear radiation. Because if you look at the ultra vague definition of special nuclear material, which is section 51 Atomic Energy Act of 1954, it says anything that gives off a sizable amount of atomic energy. Literally, that's what it says. Well, what's sizable and what legal gymnastics are you saying this stuff, which is obviously not who knows, maybe it is a nuclear weapon, and you're saying this is a U.S. nuclear secret, you're trans-classifying it into a nuclear secret, which I understand maybe at first why they did that, and I'm not admonishing the hard decisions that presidents and other folks did many years ago when this was more of an enigma and we wanted to lock it down, figure it out, and then see what we're going to do.
When the Air Force Special Weapons Center was disestablished in 1976, when operating under Air Force Systems Command, the AFSWC OPR, or Office of Primary Responsibility, came to the Air Force Weapons Lab, or AWFL. Then in 1992, AFWL merged into AFRL. And I know this is complicated, but this means the Air Force Special Weapons Center is part of the modern-day Air Force Materiel Command through two channels, both the modern-day Primary R&D Lab of the Air Force AFRL and the Air Force Systems Command, which would form the modern-day AFMC. And look, I get it, this is very complicated, so that is why I'm creating this chart on screen now to highlight all of these critical former MAJCOMs and components that make up the modern-day AFMC, that I wager are critical components to UFO legacy programs. But why do I talk about this Air Force Special Weapons Center? Well, this to me is one of the most interesting parts of this entire video. There is one figure associated with early 1950s Air Force UFO retrievals that is more enigmatic and curious than almost anyone else I have ever covered. Tell me if you've heard this name before. Eric Henry Wang. And until now, I have found next to nothing actionable on Wang, let alone a photograph of this mysterious man. But after finding some breakthroughs in Kirtland Air Force Base's 1956 yearbook, we can finally find some answers on Wangs that help put together decades of puzzle pieces. Eric Henry Wang has been infamously named in two UFO crash retrieval cases I consider very likely real: the 1953 Kingman, Arizona UFO crash retrieval and the 1948 Aztec, New Mexico UFO crash retrieval. One of my earliest videos actually focused on the Kingman crash, a retrieval case that had captured my imagination for years. And as we discussed with Christopher Mellon's Signal Exchange, apparently he and unknown parties came to the conclusion this case is real as well, and the SES-2 gatekeeper to Air Force programs, possibly Russell Weiler, may have been protecting the history of this crash retrieval. In the Kingman case, Wang was listed as leading a reverse engineering team. These accusations were levied by primary witness Arthur Stansel Jr., who first disclosed his first-hand encounter with the retrieval operation under the pseudonym Fritz Warner. Stansel, a World War II Army veteran and an accomplished engineer, worked out of then Wright Field on many historically significant programs, including the Manhattan Project. One such mission Stansel was involved in was 1953's Operation Upshot Knothole. This project isn't on Kingman, so I will skip over many of the crucial details. But Stansel claimed he was taken to the crash site to analyze wreckage ballistics, and again, Stansel listed Wang as a senior reverse engineering team lead. Well, indeed, shockingly, Arthur Stansel did in fact work directly under Eric H. Wang on Operation Upshot Knothole nuclear tests. Here we can find Wang operated as the technical and scientific monitor for the Air Force program. Wang's official duties here in 1953 was chief for the Special Studies Office out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, out of the Air Research and Development MAJCOM, the precursor to Air Force Systems Command. Outside of some old civil engineering DTIC documents and Air Force MATERIEL command documents regarding the Cold War, discussing Wang as a critical DoD engineer out of Wright-Patterson and Kirtland Air Force Base, I found very little regarding Wang. Regardless of Wang being named by Stansel, a very credible witness to the Kingman crash, as well as Wang being named as a chief under the Air Research and Development Command working out of Kirtland and Wright-Patterson, two Air Force bases and a former MAJCOM we have discussed extensively in regard to Air Force legacy programs. Wang was still a dead end, and there was no imagery to put a face to the name. Fast forward to when I tackled the 1948 Aztec, New Mexico crash retrieval. I found a convoluted case where, in my opinion, a real crash retrieval event was buried under layers of epic drama, disinformation, bad actors, and smearing of witnesses. The biggest contributor to this case, in my opinion, is the legendary UFO researcher and personal hero of mine, William Steinman. I could rant and rave about Steinman all day long, but his incredibly valuable and incredibly rare 1986 book, UFO Crash at Aztec, A Well-Kept Secret, is the definitive Aztec investigation. Steinman even went through old Denver court records to argue why Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer were not the simple conmen history has painted them as. In his pursuit of the truth of Aztec, Steinman once again came across Wang, and according to Steinman, quote, "When one mentions the name of Dr. Eric Henry Wang to anyone who knew about his work, especially the Intelligence Department personnel, no matter what their rank and responsibility, they shudder and ask you to leave them alone. When one starts investigations into his life and background, the various branches of the intelligence group start buzzing with activity. The work that Dr. Wang was involved in was so highly classified that there were no more levels of secretly left above that. He was involved and in charge of some of the most secret segments pertaining to the ultimate secret, the Flying Saucer program," end quote. Similar to my conclusions, Steinman found it exceedingly difficult to find mentions of Wang in the public domain. Steinman was able to wrangle up tiny references to Wang, his obituary in fact, in the April 1961 edition of Mechanical Engineering magazine. The obituary Steinman uncovered shed more light on this enigmatic figure, possibly connected to Aztec and Kingman. Wang was born in Austria on 6 May 1906, and after earning his degree in teaching in Cincinnati, Ohio, Wang served from 1949 to 1956 as head of the Department of Special Studies at Wright Air Development Center. In 1956, Wang's department was moved to Sandia Laboratory Complex at Kirtland Air Force Base, where he remained until his death in 1960, sadly at the age of 54. Admirably, Steinman contacted an individual in Albuquerque who knew Wang very well. This individual was mentioned only by the name MW. MW stated Wang's personal papers were all confiscated by military intelligence upon his death, placed behind lock and key of a highly secret section of the library at Kirtland Air Force Base. Indeed, M.W. told Steinman one Dr. H.A.K. is, quote, deeply involved in the flying saucer program. In fact, he was completely in charge of it at the time Dr. Wang was still alive and involved in it, end quote. These initials, H.A.K., while these could possibly be one Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor and U.S. Secretary of State. Wishing to discuss saucers off a likely tampered-with line, Steinman and M.W. planned to exchange letters. Steinman never heard back from M.W., however, but did notice his mail being tampered with and a tracking device stuck to his van. But after what feels like a lifetime, I finally found this obituary and learned more about Wang's role. Oh, and yeah, from this obituary, we can find out that M.W. Steinman spoke to, well, that was Maria Wang, Eric Wang's wife. So Wang's wife not only confirmed he was involved in the quote-unquote flying saucer program, that his boss and head of the program while Wang was active was quite possibly Henry Kissinger. And more from that obituary. Wang's position within Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that was moved to Kirtland in 1956 was in the research directorate of the Air Force Special Weapons Center, the former MAJCOM that ultimately formed the skeleton of Air Force Systems Command and the AFRL, both of which today comprise the skeleton of Air Force Materiel Command. So Dr. Eric Henry Wang, an individual named as early as the 1970s by Stansel as being a critical UFO legacy program scientist, literally served within the highest echelons of the Air Force Special Weapons Center that would become the AFMC of today. Talk about an incredible connection. And that's when I found it. A 1956 Kirtland Air Force Base yearbook focused on the Air Force Special Weapons Center. Within the research directorates, there he is. An image of a man I am sure everybody here has seen for the first time. A man deeply connected with UFO legacy programs, Eric Henry Wang. So in this section, we have studied Air Force MAJCOMS under the headquarters of the Air Force. Of the 10 MAJCOMS in existence, 4 caught our eye. And of these 4, only one, AFMC, attracted our attention for an entire investigation. In summary, the lineage of Air Force Materiel Command, the highest budgeted MAJCOM tasked with acquisition and RDT for the Air Force, is chock full of other institutions, individuals, and claims surrounding UFO legacy programs. These largely included the Air Force Systems Command, Air Force Logistics Command, Air Materiel Command, Air Research and Development Command, the Air Force Special Weapons Center, and Eric Henry Wang. What's going on, everybody? It's Gerb, and if you made it with me this far, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me, and I truly hope you learned something today because I sure did while making this project. Before I get into my end of video rant, a couple things here. You'll notice behind me a new backdrop. I moved house during the making of this video, which is one of the many reasons why this project in particular took so long. I'm sure you can guess the other reasons why this project took me so darn long to make. But, with that being said, let's just jump in and start talking about my end of video rant and kind of recap some of my thoughts on the project. Now, would you believe me if I told you that I didn't even get everything I wanted to put into this project into the project? For example, a key missing part here is NASIC, the National Air and Space Intelligence Center out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which I both believe and have exposure to having involvement in UFO legacy programs for the Air Force and for joint programs. This was something because our project was already 3.5 hours or so, I just did not have the ability to put into the project. So, maybe another time we'll add on a chapter, make a supercut, or I'll make a full video on NASIC and other Air Force stuff. As we pulled on these threads today and as we reach the conclusion of the project, I think the primary thesis and primary outlook and thing I hope people look at moving forward from this project is what I like to call and what others have referred to me as the hidden wing. This is a test and evaluation program of derivative vehicles, ranging from derivative vehicles to alien reproduction vehicles and non-human intelligence craft that humans have found a way to interface with. And this project, this flight test program and this T&E program, sees pilots pulled from the USN TPS U.S. Navy Test Pilot School out at Pax River, and of course the AFTC Air Force Test Center TPS out at Edwards Air Force Base. This project is conducted across the Western Ranges. The Western Ranges include, but are not limited to, the Utah Test and Training Range, the Nevada Test and Training Range, and the airspace around the Edwards 412th Test Wing. Now, an interesting thing before I continue with the hidden wing exploration here is recall back to the testimony of Sergeant Roderick Castle, who in 1997, as a Marine, as an AV-8B aviation ordnance technician as an AV-8B Harrier Jet AC ordnance technician, Castle was participating in the 1997 Hunter Warrior warfighting experiment, kind of near a little bit northwest of 29 Palms Marine Corps Station. When responding to some unidentified flare activity, he and his fellow Marines encountered an enormous black triangle hovering silently and a ground element team. Well, the direction in which that triangle departed was back towards Edwards Air Force Base, not just Edwards, but R2508, which is a restricted Edwards Air Force Base site. So that's just another interesting parallel to this thesis today, to the hidden wing. So as I kind of discussed, hidden wing features ARV, derivative tech, and non-human intelligence vehicles. It is run out of Western Ranges. This is overseen by, of course, elements of the Edwards 412 Test Wing, but the real administrators here to this project I've outlined are AFTE, Test and Evaluation, as well as, of course, the AFTC, which, as we know, extends to AFMC and AFRL and that whole MAJCOM. But if we're looking at the real top of the chain of command for this specific T&E program, for actual hands-on T&E, this would be AFTE. And I would be really interested to see different individuals who have spearheaded AFTE, an individual by the last name Clark, and how they might have set up the infrastructure for this program. Under TE, we looked at TEP, we looked at TEZ, special programs, and specifically, I wager that I have had exposure and understanding to TEZ involvement. So the hidden wing, we also looked at, of course, SAF-AQ, SAF-AA, a huge emphasis on SAF-AQ as we kind of abridge from the NRO program, whose NRO acquisition programs are joint ran by the DD&I ATNF, Deputy Director for National Intelligence, Acquisition, Technology, and Facilities, and USD ANS, Undersecretary for Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. From what I understand and from what I have learned, acquisition is a major part in UFO legacy programs in various intelligence and armed forces divisions of the United States. Specifically, we looked at AQL, special programs, AQX, acquisition integration, and AQR, science, technology, and engineering. All three of these, not only do I suspect have had involvement in legacy programs, but some of the testimony I have gathered over my research and individuals I've talked to have directly named these elements, specifically AQX. So SAF-AQ was, of course, extremely interesting, and we looked at the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Facilities, or maybe logistics. Get my wires crossed there right now. But we looked at individuals like Susie Payton, Lawrence J. Delaney, and of the 14 ASAC-AF ATNFs, we derived that 8 of 14, over half of individuals who have served as the ASAC-AF ATNF, have some combination of something like SAIC, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, LTV Aerospace in their bio pre-government service. Isn't that interesting? You know, we also looked at SAF-AA, which is, of course, the Administrative Assistant Secretary to the Air Force. We looked at SAF-AAH, Special Programs, and Russell E. Weiler, and SAF-AAZ, Info Protection / Special Program Oversight, etc. And we looked at William E. McClure there. I'm sorry, so many names. I just wrapped up the project. There's so much floating around in my brain, so if I'm tripping up with my words, I'm sorry there, guys. Promise I'm not trying to. And we connected McClure or Russell E. Weiler to the possible SES-2 gatekeeper that Christopher Mellon outlined when he posted some redacted signal exchanges. And this redacted signal exchange was in response to actually likely in response to Sean Kirkpatrick screenshotting and sending some of his signal exchanges with Christopher Mellon to be included in a FOIA drop to John Greenwald. And I think that was about summer 2024. And this was in relation to David Grush clearly not trusting Arrow and not talking to Arrow, and Sean Kirkpatrick throwing a hissy fit about that. So I found that interesting. And of course, in that signal exchange that SES2 gatekeeper is named, I have to thank Alex Katz for his excellent work. I'm at a crossroads here. I probably lean 60-40 Russell Weiler versus William E. McClure. I slightly think this is Russell Weiler. And of course, again, I have to commend Alex. But I firmly believe one of these two men is that SES gatekeeper Mellon was referring to. But both of these men have involvement in history in legacy programs. Outside of SAF-AQ, we talked about the RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office. And we, of course, took a look at some footage of Randall Walden, director of RCO and program executive officer and senior executive service. Remember, senior executive service is the civilian equivalent to a flag officer or general officer. So like a 2-star SES would be a 2-star general. But the RCO, as far as I understand, the RCO is the perfect mechanism for UFO legacy programs, clandestine RDT&E, test and evaluation out at the Hidden Wing, out at Edwards Air Force Base in the Western Ranges, to bypass traditional bureaucratic red tape and kind of pull funding from anywhere that's needed. Of course, if folks of the channel, regular viewers will know my friend Kermit, know that Kermit is big and a professional in the finance world. I'm sure he would love to get his teeth on kind of what we talked about today from the testimony of Ed, that 30 to 40% of various budgets get slashed by elements of AQ before reaching SAF-FM or financial management. I found that incredibly intriguing. What else did we cover? And of course, the big elephant in the room probably is, of course, AFOSI PJ, or Office of Special Projects. We discussed PJ Executive Director Terry Phillips, who also served as Air Force Special Access Program Security Director before he moved on to Leidos and then Northrop Grumman. When we talk about gatekeepers, at least in the public realm, I see so much focus on folks like Glenn Gaffney, now James Clapper. Thankfully, thank you, David Grush, for that absolutely courageous act to name Clapper, since folks in Age of Disclosure would not name him and have likely received top cover from him before for National Security Council run things. So thank you, Mr. Grush, for ousting Clapper and Stephanie O'Sullivan. But the gatekeeper conversation kind of revolves around Gaffney, O'Sullivan, Clapper, Doug Wolf, former CIA DS&T Deputy Director, former ADNI ATNF, and kind of founder of the CIA's Office of Global Access. I've tried to introduce some other names into that are starting to get some traction, thankfully, including Mary Sturtevant, who was a long-time CIA spook and also served within the NRO and various VP positions at Lockheed Martin, including Vice President for Government Affairs from 2006 to 2021. Christopher Mellon asked this woman again, stop protecting her. I'm sure she remembers this time. But there are other names and gatekeepers I want to enter into that conversation at such a high level. These include William E. McClure, Randall G. Walden. These include Russell E. Weiler. These include folks like Donna Shipton as well. And the biggest of that group, the biggest of this project, is Terry Phillips. You know, there was some tweets about Eric Burleson watching my recent interview with Jesse Michael. So I have to say, Representative Burleson, if you are watching this, an individual like Terry Phillips needs to be hit with a subpoena or interrogatories. And please don't take the Luna route and announce publicly that you're going to subpoena somebody like she did to Kirkpatrick back at the hearings on 9 September 2025. But with that being said, this was such a robust project. And we've talked about AQ, we've talked about RCO, we've talked about SAF-AA, including AAH, AAZ. We've talked about AFOSI PJ and their cadre of FBI elements. What haven't we touched on in our end of video rant? Well, of course, that would be major commands. There are 10 major commands in existence. We looked at 4 and we narrowed down 1 to look at for the majority of this video, that being Air Force MATERIEL Command. Why MATERIEL Command? Well, as we showed, and I didn't even get into connections with Roswell and the former Air Materiel Command, Air Force MATERIEL Command is the deepest rooted MAJCOM in prior UFO legacy program discussion, dating back to figures like Eric Henry Wang, with the AFSWC, that of course the Air Force Special Weapons Center, within which Wang operated in their Research and Development Directorate, specifically the Research Directorate, from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to moving to Kirtland Air Force Base, in which he remained until his death. That AFSWC served as a subordinate, transferred from a major command to a subordinate to the Air Research and Development Command, ARDC, onto Air Force Systems Command, AFSC, and of course, AFSC and Air Force Logistics Command merged in 1992 to form Air Force MATERIEL Command. Not only that, but when the AFSWC was dissolved as a subordinate to the AFSC in 1976, the OPR, or Office of Primary Responsibility of AFSWC, transferred to the Air Force Research Lab. Air Force Research Lab, of course, intertwined in this project throughout all we did, because, of course, AFRL contains a major presence at many of the United States testing ranges and air bases, and these include Edwards Air Force Base, Kirtland Air Force Base, and, of course, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So again, as I talked with NASIC at the beginning, there was so much we couldn't even fit into this project, and this, to me, is the start of analysis of Air Force programs. So again, I would like to reference back to my UFO legacy program pyramid. The United States Air Force, in my opinion, is a DoD/IC admin, one of the second layers of the pyramid, but it's not that simple. With layers hidden within layers, it's not just the amorphous or nebulous they as an Air Force that operates within the programs. I am extremely confident in my assertions and my hypotheses here, extremely, about as confident as one could possibly be, and I'm not telling you to believe it. I am saying that I present this research for you as a viewer to follow up on and form your own thoughts and conduct follow-up research, but I personally have the utmost conviction here in what I put out. I stand by what I've said today, and I will back it up. And, you know, if you were to press me about these details, I would stand by them no matter what. I'm extremely confident in my theses today. But again, the DoD/IC admin layer of my pyramid and the Air Force's involvement in that, it's not just the Secretary of the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, but it is stuff like SAF-AQ and specific elements within SAF-AQ and the RCO and AFTE and AFTEZ. All of this stuff filtering down to their work on their major with their major commands, their MRTFBs and so forth, and subordinate wings and numbered air forces. I hope that sort of top-down view as we trickled down was pretty apparent today. I know I said that if you learn one thing from the video, I'd like it to be my hidden wing thesis about the test and evaluation program out at the Western Ranges. You know, I'll expand on that statement. I hope you learned three things today. That, the hidden wing, the name Terry Phillips, and of course, the sort of compartmentalization or directorates within the Air Force. I mean, I'm willing to bet a lot of individuals who watch this video, you know, weren't aware of the specific special programs, attachments, and so forth in the Air Force that are kind of re-ruled under specific compartments within the air staff or within compliance or within the SAF-AA. I find it absolutely intriguing. And again, I think that what I outlined here today is going to age very strongly in the future, as I'll be an optimist here as we get some forms of disclosure. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this hidden wing, if there were attempts to reveal this hidden wing to the world in years past. Not too far from years past either. But let me know what you guys have to say below. I really hope this could spark some strong discussion. You know, I'd like to see some other trailblazers like Alex Katz start to look into AQL, AQX, AQR, into TE, TEP, TEZ, AFOSI, PJ, you know, all the elements of AQ, AAH, AAZ. Well, Katz has already done AAH because he's awesome. But I'd like to see a lot of discussion get sparked based upon this project. I really hope we see some kind of fruitful discussions. You know, still to this day, I'll see kind of large-scale podcasts, you know, whether it be Joe Rogan, whether it be other podcasts, where individuals who aren't necessarily hardcore on the topic but have an interest in the topic are talking about UFO legacy programs. And I still see the question thrown around, how could the nebulous U.S. government keep such a thing secret? Well, with compartments like AQL, with compartments like SAF-AAZ, with compartments like AFOSI, PJ, who are legally obliged to kill insider and outsider threats to programs if it's deemed a severe enough national security risk. So I hope stuff like that kind of answers these questions or can help people address such questions in the public realm. I know this project was super different than anything I've ever done. You know, I've made UFO legacy program analysis on the NRO and the Navy and Northrop Grumman and SAIC and so forth. Those are primarily addressings of claims and so forth. And while I stand by those projects as well, I wanted to kind of trailblaze here and take a different route to what I've done before. I could have spent the whole project talking about Fouché, talking about Blue Book stuff, but I really wanted to craft the Air Force legacy program structure as I understand it. And again, I think that my framework of the legacy program structure is pretty accurate. And I think over time it's going to age pretty well. But I want to know what you guys think. You know, I don't have all the answers here. This is just something that I have had some pretty interesting exposure to. And of course, this project has taken me years to be able to have the confidence to put out this thesis. So ever since I started to kind of pull on the threads of legacy programs, it has been a goal of mine, a desire of mine to address the Air Force, but in such a specific and appropriate way. Again, let me know what you guys think below. And as I wrap up the section, please remember to like and subscribe. That really helps out the channel. And I thank each and every one of you for being here. I do have a Patreon. I don't gatekeep content, so only support what you think the channel is worth. I'll probably open up channel memberships as well, you know, besides some, I guess, custom emojis of my logo and stuff. I don't gatekeep content. So there as well, just support what you think the channel is worth. And if you're just watching the video, like and subscribing, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank everybody for being here. Of course, I got some awesome stuff on the way. I can't wait to share. If you're watching this video before the 31st of January, please keep my guy, Alexander Volkanovsky, in your thoughts if you're watching some UFC. Anybody who's watched the channel long enough knows he is my favorite athlete of all time, and I'm way too emotionally invested in his fight. So hopefully I don't have a bad day on Saturday. With that being said, guys, thanks again for being here, and I will catch everybody next time. And again, let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much. Bye.